Changing morals when convenient. Some people do not abandon their values all at once. They bend them quietly, one convenient excuse at a time, until right and wrong depend entirely on what benefits them. Changing morals when convenient is the habit of adjusting personal principles whenever honesty, loyalty, or fairness becomes uncomfortable. A person with this trait may speak passionately about respect when they demand it, then ignore that same principle when respecting someone else requires sacrifice. Their morality is not anchored in conviction. It shifts according to advantage, pressure, and personal desire. This behavior is difficult to detect because such people often sound deeply principled. They know the correct words, defend admirable ideas, and condemn actions they secretly excuse in themselves. Their standards appear firm until those standards interfere with what they want. Then, exceptions appear, details are twisted, and responsibility is transferred elsewhere. The emotional damage comes from unpredictability. You may trust that they value truth, only to discover truth matters when it exposes another person. Loyalty matters when they receive it. Forgiveness matters when they need another chance. But punishment becomes necessary when someone else makes the mistake. Over time, their shifting standards create confusion and self-doubt. You begin wondering whether you misunderstood what happened because their explanations constantly change. Yesterday's unacceptable behavior becomes today's reasonable decision simply because they now benefit from it. This pattern often reveals a stronger attachment to image than integrity. They want to appear good without accepting the cost of goodness. The clearest warning appears when the same action receives completely different judgment depending on who committed it, who was harmed, and what they personally stand to gain when nobody is watching or applauding. Exploiting kindness as weakness. Some people do not appreciate kindness. They study it. They notice who forgives quickly, who avoids conflict, and who gives more chances than most. Then they begin testing how much they can take before that kindness finally turns into resistance. Exploiting kindness as weakness is the habit of treating another person's compassion as permission to cross boundaries. Instead of seeing patience as maturity, they interpret it as surrender. Instead of valuing generosity, they assume it can be demanded. Every act of understanding becomes another opportunity to push further. This behavior often begins subtly. They ask for small favors, ignore minor limits, or offer apologies that never lead to change. When the kind person remains calm, the demands grow. What once seemed like an isolated mistake slowly becomes a pattern of entitlement. The emotional damage is especially deep because kind people usually blame themselves first. They wonder whether they were unclear, too sensitive, or unfair for finally saying no. The exploiter depends on this self-doubt. It allows them to avoid responsibility while making the injured person feel guilty for protecting themselves. They may also praise kindness only when it benefits them. The moment compassion includes consequences, they call it coldness. The moment patience ends, they accuse the other person of changing. This trait reveals that they do not respect kindness itself, they respect access. They value the person only while that person remains easy to use, easy to pressure, and easy to forgive. That refusal often exposes the resentment their gratitude had carefully hidden underneath. Their true attitude appears when generosity is no longer available on demand, and the person they underestimated finally chooses self-respect. Fearing emotional independence. Some people feel safest when another person needs their approval, attention, or reassurance to feel whole. The moment that person begins thinking clearly, setting boundaries, or finding peace without them, something inside them becomes threatened. Fearing emotional independence is the discomfort someone feels when they can no longer control another person through affection, silence, guilt, or uncertainty. They may claim to want confidence in others, but only while that confidence does not reduce their influence. This trait often appears when a partner, friend, or family member begins healing. Instead of celebrating the change, they become distant, critical, or unusually demanding. They may create new problems, revive old arguments, or question the person's loyalty simply because dependence is fading. Emotional independence removes the leverage they once held. A person who no longer fears abandonment is harder to manipulate. Someone who trusts their own judgment is less likely to accept confusing explanations, shifting standards, or conditional affection. The emotional damage comes from how independence is made to feel like betrayal. Growth is called selfishness. Boundaries are called disrespect. Calmness is treated as coldness. The person becoming stronger may begin to feel guilty for needing less reassurance and fewer permissions. Those who fear emotional independence often prefer connection built on insecurity rather than mutual respect. They want to be needed more than they want to be known. Dependence makes them feel powerful, while another person's inner stability makes them feel replaceable. Their real fear is not losing love, it is losing control over how someone feels, thinks, and chooses when that person no longer needs emotional permission to stand on their own without begging them to stay anymore. Using partial truth to seem honest. Some people rarely tell a complete lie. They reveal enough truth to appear open, then hide the parts that would change how you see them. Using partial truth to seem honest is the habit of sharing selected facts while concealing important details. The words may be technically accurate, but the picture they create is deliberately incomplete. This allows someone to defend themselves by saying they never lied, even though they intentionally led others toward the wrong conclusion. This trait is difficult to detect because honesty is usually measured by what was said, not by what was withheld. They may confess to a small mistake while hiding the larger betrayal behind it. They might admit where they were, but leave out who was present, what happened, or why they kept it secret. Partial truth creates an illusion of transparency. Because they volunteered some information, you may assume there is nothing else to discover. Their selective openness lowers your suspicion and makes later questions feel unnecessary or unfair. The emotional damage appears when the missing details surface. You realize the truth was available all along, but it was divided into harmless pieces and arranged to protect their image. The betrayal feels deeper because your trust was built using information designed to mislead you. They often respond by focusing on technical accuracy. Instead of acknowledging deception, they argue over exact words, insisting you misunderstood or failed to ask the right question. This trait reveals someone who wants the reputation of honesty without accepting its risks. They use truth as camouflage, offering enough reality to calm your doubts while hiding whatever might expose their motives, choices, or character. Valuing influence over connection. Some people are not drawn to closeness because they want to understand you. They are drawn to the feeling of being able to shape your choices, moods, and opinions. Valuing influence over connection is the habit of caring more about having an effect on someone than building a sincere relationship with them. These people may appear attentive, supportive, or deeply interested, but their interest often fades when they can no longer guide how you think or behave. They feel important when their words determine your decisions. They enjoy being consulted, needed, and emotionally central. What looks like concern may quietly become control, especially when you begin choosing differently from what they expected. This trait often reveals itself when independence enters the relationship. They may become distant after you stop seeking their approval, irritated when you trust your own judgment, or critical when advice is not followed. Your growth feels less like progress to them and more like a loss of influence. The emotional damage comes from confusing control with care. You may believe their constant involvement proves devotion, only to discover that their affection depends on how much power they hold over your inner world. They may create doubt, offer unsolicited guidance, or position themselves as the only person who truly understands you. This keeps their voice louder than your own. Such people are often more invested in being significant than being sincere. They want access to your mind, not always responsibility for your heart. Their attention remains strongest while they can direct the relationship, shape your reactions, and feel that some part of your identity still moves according to their approval or disapproval. Punishing people for setting boundaries. Some people seem kind until you stop giving them unlimited access. The moment you say no, ask for space, or protect your peace, their warmth begins to disappear. Punishing people for setting boundaries is the habit of using silence, anger, guilt, withdrawal, or rejection to make self-protection feel dangerous. Instead of respecting a limit, they treat it as an attack against them. This behavior often appears after someone becomes less available. Messages may be ignored, affection withheld, or old mistakes suddenly brought back into the conversation. The goal is not always obvious, but the message is clear. If you protect yourself, you will lose connection. The emotional damage comes from making healthy boundaries feel cruel. You may begin questioning whether your needs are selfish, whether your limits are unreasonable, or whether peace is worth the punishment that follows. They may accuse you of changing, becoming cold, or no longer caring. In reality, what changed is their access. They were comfortable when your kindness had no limits, but your boundary forces them to face the fact that your time, energy, and emotions belong to you. This trait reveals someone who values control more than mutual respect. They do not simply dislike the boundary, they dislike what it proves. It proves you can choose without permission, step back without collapsing, and remain whole without constant approval. Their punishment is designed to train you into surrendering your limits. Each cold response, guilt-filled remark, or threat of distance is meant to make obedience feel safer than self-respect, until you begin abandoning yourself just to keep them comfortable while they take more than you ever agreed to give. Withholding clarity to keep control. Some people never give you enough certainty to feel secure. They offer attention without commitment, promises without details, and affection without explaining what any of it means. Withholding clarity to keep control is the habit of leaving another person confused because uncertainty makes them easier to influence. Instead of answering questions, they remain vague, change the subject, or give just enough reassurance to prevent you from walking away. This behavior creates an emotional imbalance. One person knows exactly what they want, while the other is forced to keep guessing. The uncertainty keeps your attention fixed on them because your mind begins searching for answers they could easily provide but deliberately avoid. They may say they care, yet refuse to define the relationship. They may promise change without naming when or how it will happen. Whenever you ask for clarity, they accuse you of being demanding, impatient, or overly emotional. The damage comes from how confusion slowly replaces confidence. You begin analyzing every message, tone, silence, and small gesture, hoping to discover what they refuse to say directly. Their lack of honesty becomes your emotional burden. Clarity would give you the power to make an informed choice. That is exactly why they avoid it. As long as you remain uncertain, they can keep access to your time, loyalty, and affection without offering equal security. This trait reveals someone who benefits from keeping others emotionally suspended. They do not fear misunderstanding, they use it. Their vague words preserve options, delay consequences, and keep you waiting for a certainty they never intended to provide because your confusion gives them control without requiring commitment, honesty, or responsibility. Resenting those they cannot manipulate. Some people admire strength only until that strength refuses to obey them. The moment someone sees through their pressure, questions their motives, or remains calm under guilt, admiration can quietly turn into resentment. Resenting those they cannot manipulate is the habit of disliking people who cannot be controlled through charm, fear, approval, silence, or emotional confusion. These individuals often feel comfortable around people who doubt themselves, seek permission, or avoid confrontation. Confidence threatens them because it removes the leverage they depend on. This resentment may appear as criticism, exclusion, mockery, or sudden coldness. They may describe an independent person as difficult, arrogant, ungrateful, or impossible to understand. What they truly dislike is not the person's character, but their resistance. The emotional danger lies in how quickly self-respect is turned into a flaw. A person who says no becomes selfish. Someone who asks questions becomes suspicious. Someone who remains calm becomes heartless. These labels are designed to make independence feel shameful. They may also try to damage the person's reputation, especially if direct control fails. By convincing others that the resistant person is unstable or hostile, they attempt to isolate them and weaken their confidence. They feel personally rejected whenever another mind remains beyond their emotional reach and authority. This trait reveals a deep need for psychological advantage. They do not merely want agreement, they want access to another person's choices. When that access is denied, resentment exposes what friendliness was hiding. Their anger is often proof that the relationship was never built on respect, but on the expectation that influence would remain unchallenged, obedience would feel natural, and resistance would eventually be punished. Faking vulnerability for sympathy. Some people do not reveal pain to be understood. They reveal carefully chosen wounds to control how others see them, soften consequences, and make accountability feel cruel. Faking vulnerability for sympathy is the habit of presenting emotion, weakness, or suffering in a way designed to gain protection, forgiveness, attention, or influence. The feelings may look sincere, but they often appear at the exact moment responsibility becomes unavoidable. This trait can be difficult to recognize because genuine vulnerability deserves compassion. Manipulative vulnerability exploits that instinct. A person may cry when confronted, describe how misunderstood they feel, or suddenly disclose painful experiences that shift attention away from the harm they caused. The emotional effect is powerful. You may enter the conversation seeking honesty, then leave comforting the person who hurt you. Their distress becomes more important than your pain, and your request for accountability begins to feel heartless. They may repeatedly present themselves as fragile whenever boundaries are enforced. Saying no becomes abandonment. Asking questions becomes an attack. Expecting change becomes evidence that you lack empathy. Over time, this pattern teaches others to silence themselves. You begin avoiding difficult conversations because you know they will collapse, withdraw, or turn the moment into another story about their suffering. This trait reveals someone who has learned that appearing wounded can be more effective than admitting fault. They do not always need to deny what happened. They only need to make you feel too guilty to continue. Their vulnerability becomes a shield, protecting their behavior while forcing others to carry both the original pain and the emotional burden of comforting the person responsible without ever receiving the same compassion. Changing personalities for advantage. Some people do not enter every room as themselves. They study the people inside, notice what earns approval, and quietly reshape their personality to become whoever offers them the greatest advantage. Changing personalities for advantage is the habit of adjusting values, opinions, mannerisms, and emotions to gain access, trust, status, or protection. This is more than normal social flexibility. The change is calculated, and the version they present depends on what they believe each person can provide. Around powerful people, they may become agreeable, respectful, and ambitious. Around vulnerable people, they may act dominant, dismissive, or controlling. With one group, they condemn certain behavior. With another, they participate in it without hesitation. This trait is difficult to detect because every version can appear convincing. They mirror interests, adopt language, and express beliefs that make others feel understood. You may believe you have discovered a deep connection, only to watch their entire identity shift when someone more useful enters the room. The emotional damage comes from realizing that the person you trusted may never have been fully present. Their attention, loyalty, and affection were shaped around your usefulness rather than genuine attachment. When confronted, they may claim they are simply adaptable or misunderstood, yet adaptation does not require abandoning principles whenever the audience changes. This trait reveals someone whose identity is built around opportunity rather than integrity. They do not merely want to belong, they want to benefit. Their personality becomes a costume selected for each situation, allowing them to gain admiration, avoid consequences, and move between people without ever revealing which version, if any, reflects who they truly are beneath all the careful performances. Testing loyalty through conflict. Some people do not ask whether you care about them. They create tension, provoke reactions, and force emotional tests to see how much discomfort you will tolerate before choosing yourself. Testing loyalty through conflict is the habit of creating arguments, jealousy, silence, or unnecessary crises to measure another person's attachment. Instead of trusting consistent love, they demand proof through pain. They may start fights over small issues, withdraw without explanation, or threaten distance just to see whether you will chase them. This behavior often comes from insecurity, but insecurity does not make the damage harmless. The person being tested is placed in a constant state of emotional uncertainty. Peace becomes suspicious because calm periods may only feel like the pause before another manufactured problem. They may accuse you of not caring enough, then reject every effort you make to reassure them. The goal is not resolution. The goal is to watch how hard you fight to keep the relationship. Each conflict becomes a private experiment designed to confirm their importance. The emotional damage grows when love begins to feel like an examination you can never pass. You may become hyper-aware of your words, afraid that one wrong response will be used as evidence of disloyalty. Over time, you stop expressing yourself honestly and begin performing devotion. This trait reveals someone who confuses emotional chaos with proof of attachment. They feel safest when others are distressed over losing them. Their loyalty tests are not built to strengthen trust, but to keep power uneven. Every argument asks the same hidden question: how much of yourself will you sacrifice to prove that I still matter to you? Keeping others insecure to feel important. Some people do not build closeness by making others feel safe. They quietly weaken confidence, create doubt, and keep reassurance just out of reach so their presence begins to feel necessary. Keeping others insecure to feel important is the habit of lowering someone's self-belief in order to increase personal influence. They may criticize small flaws, compare you to others, give inconsistent praise, or withdraw affection whenever you become more confident. The goal is not always obvious, but the effect is powerful. You begin depending on them to feel worthy again. This behavior often appears disguised as honesty, concern, or guidance. They claim they are helping you improve, yet their words rarely leave you stronger. Instead, you feel smaller, more uncertain, and increasingly afraid of losing their approval. The emotional damage comes from how slowly insecurity becomes attachment. When they cause the wound and occasionally offer comfort, their reassurance feels unusually valuable. You may start believing they understand you better than anyone else, even though they helped create the fear you now bring to them. They often become uncomfortable when you grow independent. Confidence reduces their importance because a secure person is harder to control through praise, criticism, jealousy, or silence. Your healing can feel like rejection to someone who benefited from your doubt. This trait reveals a person who wants to be needed more than they want to be loving. They do not strengthen your identity, they position themselves at the center of it. Their influence survives by making you question your value, then offering just enough approval to keep you returning for another temporary sense of worth that quickly disappears again. Saving secrets for future leverage. Some people listen to your struggles with patience, not because they want to protect you, but because they recognize how useful that information could become later. Saving secrets for future leverage is the habit of collecting details, weaknesses, mistakes, or fears to gain control when conflict, rejection, or competition appears. They may seem trustworthy while you are close, yet the information you share is quietly stored as emotional ammunition. This behavior often begins with curiosity. They ask questions, encourage confession, and create a space that feels safe enough for honesty. You may believe their interest proves closeness, but genuine trust does not turn vulnerability into a weapon. The danger appears when you set a boundary, challenge them, or try to leave. Suddenly, private details are mentioned during arguments, hinted at in front of others, or used to threaten your reputation. What you revealed in confidence becomes a reminder that they still hold something over you. The emotional damage is deeper than embarrassment. It teaches you to fear openness. You may begin questioning every conversation, wondering which details were remembered for comfort and which were preserved for control. They often justify this betrayal by claiming they were angry, defending themselves, or simply telling the truth. Yet truth shared to punish is not honesty. It is calculated exposure. This trait reveals someone who sees intimacy as a source of power. They do not only want to know you, they want information that can protect their position if affection ends. Their silence is conditional. Their loyalty depends on obedience, and every secret becomes a hidden bargaining chip waiting for the moment you become difficult to control. Pretending not to understand their harm. Some people understand exactly what they did, but act confused because admitting awareness would make innocence impossible. They ask what they did wrong, not always because they need clarity, but because they want you to become exhausted explaining pain they already witnessed. Pretending not to understand their harm is the habit of hiding behind confusion to avoid accountability. They may say they were joking, claim they never realized it affected you, or insist your reaction is impossible for them to understand. This forces you to prove that your pain is real before they will even discuss their behavior. The tactic works because explanation consumes emotional energy. You repeat the event, describe how it felt, and search for simpler words, hoping the right sentence will finally make them care. Yet each explanation creates another question, another technical disagreement, or another reason they supposedly remain confused. The emotional damage comes from being made to feel unreasonable for expecting basic empathy. You begin questioning whether the harm was obvious, whether your feelings are valid, or whether you are asking too much by wanting acknowledgement. They may understand immediately when the same behavior affects them. Their confusion appears only when recognizing your pain would require change, apology, or consequence. This trait reveals someone who uses ignorance as protection. They do not need to prove they meant no harm. They only need to pretend they cannot see it. By refusing to understand, they keep you trapped in explanation while they remain untouched by responsibility. Watching you struggle to translate pain they have already chosen not to recognize, their denial becomes another wound layered over the first betrayal. Showing empathy only in public. Some people become deeply compassionate when an audience is watching. They offer comfort, speak gently, and appear emotionally aware, but behind closed doors, that same warmth disappears. Showing empathy only in public is the habit of performing care for approval rather than offering it from genuine concern. These people understand that kindness improves their image, so they display it where others can witness, praise, or remember it. In private, their behavior may be completely different. They may dismiss pain, ignore distress, or become irritated when someone needs support without an audience present. The compassion they showed publicly was not connected to the person suffering. It was connected to how caring made them look. This trait is especially confusing because outsiders often see them as thoughtful and generous. When the person closest to them describes coldness or neglect, others may struggle to believe it. The public performance becomes protection, making private harm easier to deny. The emotional damage comes from feeling invisible beside someone everyone else considers compassionate. You may begin questioning your experience because their reputation contradicts what you endure. They know how to say the right words, but only when those words can earn admiration. They may also use public displays of empathy to silence criticism. A person who appears caring in front of others can easily portray anyone who challenges them as ungrateful, unstable, or cruel. This trait reveals that their concern depends on recognition. They do not always want to ease suffering. They want the identity of someone who does. Their empathy becomes a social costume, worn for applause and removed the moment compassion requires patience, sacrifice, privacy, or accountability. Growing colder after forgiveness. Some people become warm only while they are afraid of losing you. They apologize, soften their voice, and promise change. But once forgiveness is given, the tenderness that brought you back begins to disappear. Growing colder after forgiveness is the habit of treating another chance as proof that consequences have ended. Instead of valuing mercy, they interpret it as permission to relax, withdraw effort, or return to the same behavior that caused the damage. At first, their regret may seem convincing. They may become attentive, affectionate, and patient. Yet this change often lasts only until they feel secure again. Once they believe you will stay, their urgency fades, their promises weaken, and the emotional distance returns. The damage comes from how forgiveness is turned against the person who offered it. You may wonder whether you expected too much, forgave too quickly, or misunderstood their apology. Meanwhile, they benefit from your compassion without carrying the responsibility that forgiveness was meant to support. They may even become irritated when the past is mentioned, claiming you should have moved on because you chose to forgive. This allows them to demand peace without rebuilding trust. This trait reveals someone who wanted relief from consequences more than genuine repair. Their warmth was not always evidence of change. It may have been the behavior needed to regain access. Once that access feels secure, the effort disappears. Their coldness after forgiveness exposes what the apology was truly protecting. They were not only afraid of hurting you, they were afraid of losing what your presence provided. And once the threat passed, so did the version of them that seemed willing to change. Treating relationships like competitions. Some people cannot simply share a relationship. They must secretly win it. They measure who is loved more, who has more influence, who seems less attached, and who holds the greater emotional advantage. Treating relationships like competitions is the habit of turning closeness into a contest for attention, control, admiration, or superiority. Instead of feeling secure through mutual care, they compare every gesture, argument, sacrifice, and success as though someone must come out ahead. This behavior may appear through subtle scorekeeping. They remember who apologized first, who called more often, who received praise, or who seemed happier without the other. Even affection becomes strategic. They may withhold warmth to avoid appearing more invested, or create distance to make the other person chase them. The emotional damage comes from never feeling like teammates. Moments that should create connection become opportunities for comparison. Your achievements may make them distant. Your confidence may feel like a threat. Your independence may be treated as an attempt to gain power. They may also compete during conflict, focusing more on winning than understanding. Admitting fault feels like losing. Compromise feels like surrender, and vulnerability feels dangerous because it gives the other person an advantage. This trait reveals someone who struggles to experience love without hierarchy. They do not only want closeness, they want the stronger position within it. The relationship becomes less about trust and more about who cares less, needs less, and can leave first. Over time, intimacy is replaced by silent rivalry, and both people begin guarding themselves against someone who was supposed to feel like home, until tenderness itself begins to feel like weakness rather than safety, valuing people only when useful. Some people seem deeply interested in you while your presence solves a problem, opens a door, offers comfort, or gives them something they cannot easily obtain alone. The moment your usefulness fades, so does their attention. Valuing people only when useful is the habit of treating relationships like transactions. These individuals may appear loyal, caring, or generous, but their effort often depends on what another person can provide. They value access, convenience, status, emotional support, money, information, or opportunity more than the human being offering it. This behavior often feels warm at first. They may call frequently, praise your qualities, and make you feel essential. Yet the connection becomes noticeably weaker when you need support, set limits, or can no longer meet their expectations. The emotional damage comes from realizing that affection was conditional. You may replay the relationship, wondering whether any moment was genuine or whether every gesture carried a hidden purpose. Their sudden distance can make you question your worth, even though what truly changed was your usefulness to them. They often return when they need something again, behaving as though no distance ever existed. Their warmth reappears quickly because the connection was never fully gone in their mind. It was simply inactive until another benefit appeared. This trait reveals someone who measures people by function rather than character. They do not always miss you when you leave. They miss what you did, how you made them feel, or what access disappeared with you. Their loyalty lasts only while the relationship remains profitable, comfortable, or useful to the life they are trying to build, without requiring equal care, sacrifice, or loyalty. Creating dependence, then resenting it. Some people make themselves impossible to replace, then become angry when others begin relying on them. They offer constant help, make every decision, and slowly remove the confidence that once allowed someone to stand alone. Creating dependence, then resenting it, is the habit of encouraging emotional, financial, or practical reliance before criticizing the person for needing support. At first, they may insist on handling everything. They discourage independence, question outside advice, and make their presence feel essential. Over time, the other person may stop trusting their own judgment. They begin asking for permission, reassurance, or assistance because independence has been repeatedly weakened. Yet once this reliance becomes visible, the person who created it may complain that they are carrying too much. The emotional damage comes from being trapped inside a contradiction. You were taught not to act alone, then shamed for needing guidance. You were encouraged to depend, then called helpless when that dependence became inconvenient. They may use exhaustion as proof of superiority, reminding you how much they do while ignoring how often they prevented you from doing things yourself. Their resentment becomes another tool of control because guilt makes you afraid to ask for support, while insecurity keeps you from leaving. This trait reveals someone who wants to feel indispensable without accepting the responsibility that comes with being needed. They enjoy the power of dependence, but resent its demands. The relationship becomes a cycle in which they weaken your independence, criticize the weakness they created, and use your resulting shame to keep themselves central to your choices, confidence, and daily life, while denying you the freedom to become capable without them. Helping others to feel superior. Some people are eager to help, but not because they genuinely care. They enjoy the feeling of being needed more than the satisfaction of seeing someone become stronger. Their generosity quietly depends on remaining above the person they are helping. Helping others to feel superior is the habit of offering support mainly to reinforce a sense of importance, intelligence, or control. Their assistance often comes with subtle reminders of how much you owe them, how incapable you were without them, or how fortunate you are to have their guidance. At first, their kindness may seem generous and selfless. They volunteer advice, solve problems quickly, and appear dependable whenever difficulties arise. But over time, their help begins to feel less like encouragement and more like a way of establishing hierarchy. The emotional damage comes from realizing that your growth is not what they truly wanted. As long as you remain dependent, grateful, and impressed, they feel valuable. The moment you become confident enough to solve problems without them, their enthusiasm often fades. They may criticize your independent decisions, dismiss your progress, or remind you of past mistakes to pull you back into the role of the person who always needs saving. Your success quietly threatens the identity they built around being your rescuer. This trait reveals someone who mistakes superiority for significance. They do not simply want to contribute to your life, they want your struggles to confirm their importance. Their help becomes less about lifting you higher and more about keeping themselves on a higher level. What appears to be generosity is sometimes a carefully protected position where your dependence feeds their self-worth far more than your recovery ever could. Using generosity to create debt. Some people give freely, but only because they expect to collect something later. Their gifts may look thoughtful, yet hidden beneath every favor is the quiet expectation that one day you will repay them, whether you agreed to that arrangement or not. Using generosity to create debt is the habit of offering kindness with invisible conditions attached. They may pay for things, solve problems, or make sacrifices, but instead of giving without expectation, they keep a silent record of everything they have done. At first, their generosity feels comforting. They appear selfless, reliable, and eager to help whenever you are struggling. Over time, however, those past favors begin appearing in conversations. They remind you of everything they have done, expecting loyalty, obedience, forgiveness, or special treatment in return. The emotional damage comes from feeling that gratitude has become an obligation. Every act of kindness starts carrying emotional weight. Saying no feels impossible because you fear being reminded of everything they once gave you. They may become angry when you make independent choices that do not benefit them. In their mind, your freedom feels like betrayal because they believe their generosity earned them influence over your decisions. This trait reveals someone who treats kindness as an investment rather than a gift. They do not always want appreciation. They want leverage. Their generosity creates a relationship where affection is measured by repayment instead of sincerity. True generosity sets people free, but manipulative generosity quietly ties invisible strings around every favor. The gift becomes less important than the control it creates, leaving you feeling guilty for protecting yourself from obligations you never knowingly accepted in the first place, because what looked like kindness was actually a carefully disguised transaction. Making others repeatedly prove themselves. Some people never allow trust to settle. No matter how loyal, supportive, or consistent you are, they always need one more sacrifice, one more explanation, or one more demonstration that you truly care. Making others repeatedly prove themselves is the habit of placing endless tests in front of the people closest to them. Instead of allowing trust to grow through consistent actions, they constantly demand fresh evidence of love, loyalty, or commitment. No amount of reassurance ever feels enough because the goal is not security, it is control. At first, these requests may seem reasonable. They ask for small favors, extra attention, or repeated confirmation of your feelings. But as time passes, the expectations become impossible to satisfy. Every proof loses its value the moment it is given, creating the need for another one. The emotional damage comes from living with the feeling that you are never enough. You begin measuring every word and action, afraid that one mistake will erase everything you have already done. Love starts feeling like a performance instead of a safe place to be yourself. They may ignore years of faithfulness while focusing on a single disappointment. Your history together suddenly means very little because they always find another reason to question your intentions. This trait reveals someone who does not know how to rest in trust. They often mistake uncertainty for depth and constant testing for genuine love. Instead of appreciating consistency, they keep moving the finish line, ensuring you remain focused on earning acceptance rather than expecting respect. The greatest irony is that the person demanding endless proof is often the one least willing to prove themselves, expecting unwavering loyalty while offering only conditional trust in return. Punishing honesty while demanding it. Some people constantly ask for the truth, but only as long as the truth is comfortable to hear. The moment honesty challenges their ego, exposes a mistake, or disappoints their expectations, they make you regret ever being truthful. Punishing honesty while demanding it is the habit of encouraging openness while reacting harshly whenever that openness becomes inconvenient. They claim they value honesty above everything else, yet respond with anger, guilt, withdrawal, or criticism when someone finally speaks without hiding. At first, they may insist that you should always tell them how you feel. They promise they can handle the truth and assure you that honesty strengthens relationships. But when you express a concern, disagree with them, or reveal something they dislike, their reaction sends a very different message. The emotional damage comes from learning that honesty is only safe when it agrees with them. You begin filtering your words, hiding your feelings, and avoiding difficult conversations because experience has taught you that openness leads to punishment rather than understanding. They may accuse you of being disrespectful, insensitive, or unnecessarily harsh, even when you spoke calmly and sincerely. Instead of addressing what was said, they focus on making you feel guilty for saying it at all. This trait reveals someone who wants the comfort of believing they know the truth, without accepting the discomfort that truth sometimes brings. They ask for honesty because it sounds admirable, but they reward silence whenever honesty threatens their self-image. Over time, people stop being genuine around them. Conversations become careful, emotions become guarded, and trust quietly disappears. They end up surrounded by polite words instead of real ones, never realizing that it was their own reactions that taught everyone to hide the truth they kept demanding to hear. Seeking closeness without offering safety. Some people want access to your deepest thoughts, fears, and emotions, yet never create an environment where you feel safe enough to share them. They crave intimacy but refuse to provide the trust that intimacy requires. Seeking closeness without offering safety is the habit of expecting emotional openness while remaining unpredictable, judgmental, or emotionally unavailable. They ask you to be vulnerable, but your honesty is often met with criticism, dismissal, or silence instead of understanding. At first, they may seem deeply interested in knowing everything about you. They encourage long conversations, ask personal questions, and make you feel chosen. But once you reveal your insecurities or painful experiences, those moments are often ignored, minimized, or remembered only when they become useful in future disagreements. The emotional damage comes from feeling exposed instead of accepted. You begin regretting the parts of yourself you shared because they no longer feel protected. What should have created connection instead creates caution, making vulnerability feel like a mistake rather than a bridge between two people. They may complain that you are emotionally distant, without recognizing that distance often grows where emotional safety is missing. People naturally protect themselves when openness repeatedly leads to discomfort instead of acceptance. This trait reveals someone who wants the benefits of intimacy without accepting its responsibilities. They desire access to your inner world but resist the patience, consistency, and compassion needed to protect it. Their focus is often on knowing everything about you, not on becoming someone you can safely trust. Real closeness grows where people feel secure enough to be fully seen. When safety is absent, intimacy becomes one-sided, leaving one person understood while the other quietly learns that being completely honest comes with emotional risk rather than genuine connection. Acting confused. When confronted, some people do not respond to accountability with denial or anger. Instead, they look genuinely puzzled, as though your concerns appeared out of nowhere and they have no idea why the conversation is even happening. Acting confused when confronted is the habit of pretending not to understand criticism in order to delay responsibility. Rather than addressing what they did, they repeatedly ask what you mean, insist they are lost, or behave as though the issue is too unclear to discuss. At first, this confusion may seem sincere. You slow down, explain yourself more carefully, and search for kinder words. But every explanation is followed by another question, another misunderstanding, or another claim that they still cannot see the problem. The emotional damage comes from how quickly the focus shifts away from their behavior. Instead of examining what happened, you spend the entire conversation trying to convince them that your feelings make sense. By the end, you are emotionally exhausted while they have answered almost nothing. They may even suggest that you are overreacting because they genuinely cannot understand why you are upset. This makes your pain feel unreasonable. Even when the facts are clear, their confusion quietly becomes a shield that protects them from accountability. This trait reveals someone who understands that endless uncertainty can be more effective than outright denial. They do not have to prove they are innocent. They only need to keep the conversation trapped in circles until your confidence begins to fade. When confusion is used as a strategy instead of a genuine search for understanding, it becomes another form of avoidance. The longer you spend explaining the obvious, the less time they spend taking responsibility for the harm they knowingly caused. Apologizing only when consequences arrive. Some people never feel sorry while they are causing harm. Their regret appears only when they realize they might lose something valuable. The apology does not begin with empathy. It begins with fear. Apologizing only when consequences arrive is the habit of expressing remorse only after facing rejection, exposure, punishment, or the possibility of losing a relationship. Instead of recognizing the pain they caused, they react only when that pain starts affecting their own life. At first, they may dismiss your concerns, deny responsibility, or insist you are overreacting. They continue the same behavior because nothing has forced them to stop. But the moment you walk away, set a firm boundary, or hold them accountable, their attitude changes almost overnight. The apology may sound heartfelt. They promise to change, admit their mistakes, and speak with unusual humility. Yet the timing raises an important question. If they truly understood the damage, why did concern appear only after consequences became unavoidable? The emotional damage comes from confusing desperation with genuine remorse. You may believe the apology proves they finally understand your pain, when in reality, they may simply fear losing access to what you provided. They often focus more on the punishment they are experiencing than the suffering they created. Their words revolve around what they might lose instead of what you endured. This trait reveals someone who responds more strongly to personal discomfort than to another person's hurt. Their apology is driven less by conscience than by consequence. Once the immediate threat disappears, the urgency to change often fades with it, leaving the same patterns waiting beneath words that sounded sincere only because they arrived at the moment everything was finally slipping out of their control. Rewriting events to protect their image. Some people do not remember the past as it happened. They remember it in the way that protects their reputation, even if that means changing details, removing uncomfortable facts, or assigning blame to someone else. Rewriting events to protect their image is the habit of reshaping past situations so they appear innocent, reasonable, or misunderstood. They rarely tell an outright lie. Instead, they quietly adjust the story until their actions seem justified and their responsibility becomes difficult to see. At first, the changes may seem insignificant. They leave out certain conversations, change the order of events, or emphasize details that make them look better. But over time, the original truth slowly disappears beneath a version that serves their self-image instead of reality. The emotional damage comes from constantly having your own memories challenged. You remember what happened, yet their confident retelling makes you question yourself. They speak with such certainty that you begin wondering whether you overlooked something important or misunderstood the entire situation. They may also gather support from others by sharing only the parts of the story that create sympathy for them. Anyone hearing their version is left with an incomplete picture, making it easier for them to appear like the victim instead of the person who caused the harm. This trait reveals someone who values appearance more than accountability. Protecting their image becomes more important than protecting the truth. Rather than accepting mistakes and learning from them, they rewrite the past until it no longer threatens the person they want others to believe they are. When someone constantly edits reality to preserve their reputation, trust slowly disappears, because every conversation becomes less about discovering the truth and more about defending the version of themselves they refuse to let anyone question. Withholding affection to control behavior. Some people do not express love consistently. They give warmth when you meet their expectations, then suddenly become distant the moment you disagree, set a boundary, or make a choice they cannot control. Withholding affection to control behavior is the habit of using love, attention, or emotional warmth as a reward rather than a genuine expression of care. Instead of communicating openly, they remove closeness to pressure you into changing your actions. At first, the distance may seem temporary. They stop calling as often, become emotionally cold, or withdraw physical affection without explanation. You naturally search for what went wrong, believing you must have caused the change. That uncertainty often becomes the very tool they rely on. The emotional damage comes from linking love to performance. You begin believing affection must be earned through obedience instead of freely shared through mutual respect. Every disagreement feels dangerous because it might cost you the connection you value. They may insist they simply need space, but the warmth often returns only after you apologize, give in, or abandon your own needs. This teaches you that compliance restores closeness, while independence leads to emotional distance. Over time, you become more focused on avoiding rejection than expressing your true thoughts. Instead of asking what is healthy for you, you begin asking what will keep their affection from disappearing again. This trait reveals someone who uses emotional closeness as leverage rather than a gift. They do not always want to solve conflict. They want to shape your behavior. By controlling when love is available, they slowly train you to associate approval with submission, making their acceptance feel like something you must constantly earn instead of something freely given through genuine care and mutual respect. Returning. When someone moves on. Some people only recognize your value after realizing they no longer have unlimited access to you. The attention they withheld suddenly returns the moment they see you healing, growing, or living happily without them. Returning when someone moves on is the habit of reappearing only after another person has emotionally detached. While you were available, they showed little urgency to change or reconnect. But once your attention is no longer guaranteed, their interest unexpectedly comes back. At first, their return may seem sincere. They apologize, reminisce about good memories, or claim they finally understand what they lost. They speak with warmth that was missing when you needed it most. The timing creates hope that something has genuinely changed. The emotional damage comes from confusing renewed attention with genuine transformation. You may believe your worth has finally been recognized, when in reality, they may simply be reacting to the loss of influence they once took for granted. They often return when they notice you are no longer waiting, chasing, or seeking their approval. Your independence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty makes them curious again. What they ignored when it felt secure suddenly becomes desirable because it is no longer easily available. This trait reveals someone who values certainty more than connection. They become comfortable when they believe you will always stay, but your emotional distance awakens an interest that should have existed all along. Their return is often driven less by love than by the discomfort of realizing they no longer control a place in your life. The hardest part is that their return can reopen wounds that were finally beginning to heal, making you question progress that took months to build simply because someone noticed your peace after they had already walked away. Avoiding labels to keep options open. Some people enjoy all the benefits of commitment without ever accepting the responsibility that comes with it. They keep the relationship undefined, not because they are uncertain, but because uncertainty gives them freedom. Avoiding labels to keep options open is the habit of refusing to clearly define a relationship so they can maintain multiple possibilities at once. They may act deeply invested in private, yet become vague whenever commitment, exclusivity, or long-term intentions are discussed. At first, their hesitation may seem understandable. They say they need more time, want to avoid pressure, or believe labels should not matter if feelings are real. These explanations often sound reasonable, making you believe clarity will naturally come with patience. The emotional damage comes from living in constant uncertainty. You never fully know where you stand, what is expected, or whether you are building a future together. While you invest emotionally, they continue enjoying the freedom to change direction whenever something more appealing appears. They may become affectionate when they sense you pulling away, only to return to uncertainty once they feel secure again. This cycle keeps hope alive without providing the stability that hope deserves. Over time, You begin accepting less than you truly need because you fear that asking for clarity will push them away. Instead of expecting honesty, you settle for mixed signals and vague promises that never seem to become reality. This trait reveals someone who values flexibility more than commitment. They want access to your time, affection, and loyalty while protecting themselves from accountability. By refusing to define the relationship, they keep every door open for themselves, while quietly asking you to close every other door in your own life without ever offering the same certainty in return. Using silence as punishment. Some people do not raise their voice when they are upset. Instead, they disappear emotionally, leaving you alone with unanswered questions, growing anxiety, and the desperate need to understand what went wrong. Using silence as punishment is the habit of deliberately withdrawing communication to make another person feel guilty, powerless, or emotionally unsettled. This is different from taking healthy space to calm down. The silence is not meant to create peace, it is meant to create pressure. At first, they stop responding to messages, avoid eye contact, or answer with cold, emotionless words. They refuse to explain why they are distant, leaving you to replay every conversation in search of the mistake that caused the change. The emotional damage comes from uncertainty. Without answers, your mind fills the empty space with fear, self-blame, and endless possibilities. You may begin apologizing for things you never did, simply to end the uncomfortable silence. They often break the silence only after they feel you have become anxious enough, guilty enough, or willing enough to give them what they wanted. In this way, silence becomes a form of emotional leverage rather than healthy communication. Over time, you learn to avoid disagreement because conflict no longer ends with conversation. It ends with emotional abandonment. You become more focused on preventing silence than expressing your real thoughts and needs. This trait reveals someone who uses absence as a weapon instead of words as a bridge. They understand that unanswered questions can sometimes create more emotional pain than direct criticism. By refusing to communicate, they place all the emotional responsibility on you, hoping your discomfort will accomplish what honest conversation never could, while they remain in complete control of when connection is restored. Calling cruelty honesty. Some people take pride in saying whatever they want, believing that harshness proves authenticity. They claim they are simply telling the truth, but their words often leave wounds that honesty alone never needed to create. Calling cruelty honesty is the habit of using truth as an excuse for unnecessary harshness, humiliation, or emotional harm. Instead of speaking with respect and compassion, they hide behind the phrase, "I'm just being honest," as though honesty removes the responsibility to care about how their words affect others. At first, their bluntness may seem refreshing. They appear fearless, direct, and unwilling to pretend. But over time, a pattern begins to emerge. Their honesty almost always points outward. They eagerly expose other people's flaws while reacting defensively when the same honesty is directed back at them. The emotional damage comes from confusing abuse with sincerity. You may begin believing that feeling hurt means you are too sensitive, rather than recognizing that truth can be spoken without stripping away another person's dignity. They often choose the most painful words instead of the most helpful ones. Their goal is not always understanding or growth. Sometimes it is simply the satisfaction of saying something that gives them emotional superiority. This trait reveals someone who values expression more than empathy. They want the freedom to speak without accepting responsibility for the impact of their words. Real honesty seeks clarity, healing, and understanding. Cruelty seeks reaction, dominance, or emotional release. The difference is easy to recognize. Honest people care whether the truth helps you grow. Cruel people care only that they were able to say it. Leaving behind pain they dismiss as someone else's inability to handle the truth, blaming others for provoked reactions. Some people know exactly how to push your emotional buttons. They criticize, mock, provoke, or disrespect you until you finally react, then suddenly act as though your response is the real problem. Blaming others for provoked reactions is the habit of deliberately creating emotional pressure before using the other person's reaction to avoid responsibility. Instead of acknowledging the behavior that started the conflict, they focus entirely on how you responded after being pushed beyond your limit. At first, the provocation may seem small. They make sarcastic comments, ignore boundaries, dismiss your feelings, or repeatedly do something they know upsets you. When you remain calm, they continue. When you finally become frustrated, they immediately shift attention away from their actions and onto your emotions. The emotional damage comes from being judged by your breaking point instead of everything that led to it. You may begin feeling ashamed of your reaction while forgetting the repeated disrespect that caused it. Over time, you start questioning whether you were the problem all along. They often describe you as emotional, unstable, or difficult, carefully leaving out the long pattern of behavior that came before your response. Anyone hearing only the final moment may believe you caused the conflict. This trait reveals someone who understands that reactions are easier to criticize than patterns. By provoking first and focusing on your response later, they erase the context that exposes their own behavior. Their goal is not to understand why you reacted. It is to make your reaction seem so unreasonable that no one looks closely at what they did to create it. When someone constantly judges your response while ignoring their own repeated provocation, they are not searching for truth. They are protecting themselves from accountability by making your pain look like the real offense. Expecting forgiveness without changing. Some people ask for another chance as though forgiveness alone should erase the past. They want the relationship to heal, but they have little interest in becoming the person who caused less harm in the first place. Expecting forgiveness without changing is the habit of seeking mercy while refusing personal growth. They apologize, ask to be understood, and promise that things will be different, yet their behavior remains remarkably familiar. The words change, but the pattern stays the same. At first, their regret may sound genuine. They admit mistakes, express sadness, and insist they never wanted to hurt you. Because everyone makes mistakes, you naturally want to believe that they have learned something valuable from the experience. The emotional damage comes when forgiveness becomes permission instead of transformation. You begin offering patience, understanding, and fresh starts, only to watch the same actions repeat. Each apology slowly loses meaning because it is never followed by consistent effort. They may even become frustrated if you remain cautious. They expect trust to return immediately, believing that saying sorry should automatically restore what repeated actions destroyed. When you hesitate, they accuse you of living in the past or refusing to move on. This trait reveals someone who values relief from consequences more than personal responsibility. They want the comfort of forgiveness without accepting the discomfort of real change. In their mind, the relationship should recover simply because they acknowledged the problem, not because they committed to correcting it. True forgiveness creates space for growth, but growth still requires action. When someone repeatedly asks for understanding while protecting the same harmful behavior, they are not rebuilding trust. They are asking you to carry the weight of healing while they remain exactly as they were before. Treating disagreement as disrespect. Some people can accept praise with ease, but struggle to accept a different opinion. The moment you challenge their ideas, question their decisions, or see the situation differently, they no longer hear disagreement. They hear defiance. Treating disagreement as disrespect is the habit of interpreting different opinions as personal attacks. Instead of recognizing that healthy relationships allow room for different perspectives, they believe agreement is a measure of loyalty and respect. If you think differently, they assume you are questioning their worth or authority. At first, this behavior may seem like strong conviction. They defend their views with confidence and appear passionate about what they believe. But over time, you notice that every disagreement ends the same way. They become defensive, offended, or emotionally distant instead of remaining curious about another point of view. The emotional damage comes from learning that honesty carries a price. You begin hiding your thoughts, agreeing when you do not mean it, or avoiding important conversations just to keep the peace. Gradually, your voice becomes quieter, while theirs dominates every discussion. They may accuse you of being argumentative, ungrateful, or disloyal, simply because you expressed a different perspective. The issue quickly shifts away from the topic itself and becomes a judgment of your character. This trait reveals someone whose identity depends heavily on being right. They struggle to separate criticism of an idea from criticism of themselves. As a result, every disagreement feels like a threat that must be defeated rather than understood. Real respect allows people to think differently without fearing rejection. When someone mistakes disagreement for disrespect, they create relationships built on silence instead of honesty, where people agree out of fear rather than genuine understanding or mutual trust. Defending themselves against simple questions. Some people become unusually defensive over the smallest questions. A simple request for clarification, a calm observation, or an innocent question is treated as though it were a serious accusation. Defending themselves against simple questions is the habit of reacting with suspicion, irritation, or self-protection whenever someone seeks clarity. Instead of answering naturally, they immediately explain themselves, justify their actions, or assume they are being judged before any criticism has even been made. At first, the reaction may seem like stress or sensitivity. They insist you are reading too much into things or claim they are tired of being questioned. But as the pattern repeats, you notice that even harmless conversations quickly become emotional battles because they constantly expect hidden attacks. The emotional damage comes from learning to stay silent. You begin avoiding ordinary questions because you know they will likely trigger defensiveness, tension, or conflict. Curiosity starts feeling dangerous, and honest communication slowly disappears from the relationship. They may accuse you of not trusting them, even when your question was completely reasonable. Instead of providing a simple answer, they focus on defending themselves against intentions you never had, turning an ordinary conversation into an unnecessary argument. This trait often reveals a person carrying unresolved guilt, insecurity, or a fragile self-image. Simple questions feel threatening because they fear what those questions might expose. Even if no accusation exists, their defensive reaction says more about what they are protecting than about what you actually asked. Healthy people understand that questions are part of communication. Someone who constantly defends themselves against harmless curiosity is often fighting an invisible battle inside themselves, where every request for clarity feels like the beginning of exposure, judgment, or accountability they are desperate to avoid. Creating jealousy to test attachment. Some people do not ask whether you care about them. Instead, they try to make you afraid of losing them, believing that jealousy is the clearest proof of love. Creating jealousy to test attachment is the habit of intentionally making another person feel insecure in order to measure how emotionally invested they are. They may flirt with others, mention people who are interested in them, compare you to someone else, or behave in ways they know will trigger uncertainty. At first, these actions may seem harmless or accidental. They insist you are overthinking, claim they were only being friendly, or laugh off your concerns. But the pattern becomes clear when the same situations happen repeatedly, especially after they notice your reaction. The emotional damage comes from replacing trust with anxiety. Instead of feeling secure in the relationship, you begin wondering who else has their attention, whether you are enough, or if you must compete to keep their affection. Love slowly becomes mixed with fear. They often feel reassured when you become jealous because your discomfort confirms that you are emotionally attached. Rather than building security through honesty and consistency, they seek emotional proof through uncertainty and comparison. Over time, you may become more possessive, more anxious, or more willing to ignore your own boundaries just to avoid losing them. This emotional imbalance benefits the person creating the jealousy because your attention remains fixed on earning reassurance. This trait reveals someone who mistakes insecurity for devotion. They believe that making you afraid to lose them strengthens the relationship when it actually weakens trust. Real attachment grows through emotional safety, not emotional games. When someone repeatedly creates jealousy to measure your feelings, they are testing your fear of loss more than your capacity to love. Excusing harm with good intentions. Some people believe that having good intentions should erase the pain they caused. Instead of focusing on the damage their actions created, they focus on what they meant to do, expecting their motives to matter more than the outcome. Excusing harm with good intentions is the habit of using positive motives to avoid responsibility for negative consequences. They may insist they were only trying to help, protect, or teach you, believing that their purpose should automatically cancel the hurt you experienced. At first, this explanation may sound reasonable. After all, people do make mistakes without wanting to cause pain. But when good intentions become a permanent excuse, accountability quietly disappears. Every harmful action is defended by reminding you that they meant well. The emotional damage comes from feeling that your experience is constantly minimized. Instead of being heard, you are expected to appreciate their intentions while ignoring the emotional impact of their behavior. Your pain becomes secondary to protecting their self-image. They often become defensive when the consequences of their actions are discussed. Rather than asking how they affected you, they repeatedly explain what was in their heart, hoping that their motives will end the conversation before responsibility begins. This trait reveals someone who values being seen as a good person more than becoming a better one. Genuine growth requires accepting that kind intentions can still produce real harm. Mature people care about both what they meant and what actually happened. When someone consistently hides behind good intentions, they stop learning from their mistakes. They remain focused on defending who they believe they are instead of understanding what others truly experienced. In the end, their desire to protect their image becomes stronger than their willingness to repair the pain they caused. Demanding loyalty while staying unavailable. Some people expect unwavering devotion from others while giving very little of themselves in return. They want to be your priority, yet rarely make you feel like one. Their expectations are constant, but their presence is conditional. Demanding loyalty while staying unavailable is the habit of expecting commitment, patience, and emotional support without offering the same level of consistency. They want to know you will always be there, even though they disappear when you need them most. At first, this imbalance may not seem obvious. They speak about loyalty often, praise commitment, and insist that trust is everything. But when the relationship requires their time, vulnerability, or emotional effort, they suddenly become distant, busy, or difficult to reach. The emotional damage comes from constantly giving more than you receive. You begin believing that love means waiting, understanding, and making excuses, while your own needs are quietly pushed aside. The relationship becomes centered on protecting their comfort rather than supporting each other equally. They may become upset if you question the imbalance or begin matching the same emotional distance they have shown you. In their mind, your absence feels like betrayal, while theirs always has a reasonable explanation. This trait reveals someone who wants the security of loyalty without accepting the responsibility that loyalty demands. They enjoy knowing someone is emotionally available to them, but they resist becoming equally dependable in return. Healthy relationships are built on mutual presence, not one-sided devotion. When someone expects endless patience while remaining emotionally unavailable themselves, they are not asking for partnership. They are asking for unconditional access without equal investment. Over time, this leaves one person carrying the emotional weight of the relationship, while the other enjoys its benefits without truly sharing its responsibilities. Resenting naturally admired people. Some people become uncomfortable when admiration comes to someone else without effort. Instead of feeling inspired, they quietly feel threatened, especially when another person's respect, success, or popularity cannot be controlled or explained away. Resenting naturally admired people is the habit of feeling bitterness toward those who earn genuine respect through their character, ability, or presence. Rather than appreciating another person's strengths, they search for flaws that make the admiration seem undeserved. At first, the resentment may appear as harmless criticism. They question why others like the person so much, suggest the praise is exaggerated, or imply that the success came through luck instead of effort. The compliments others give become opportunities for them to point out hidden weaknesses. The emotional damage reaches beyond the admired person. It creates an environment where success feels unsafe. People become afraid to shine because every achievement is met with suspicion, comparison, or quiet hostility instead of encouragement. They often struggle most with qualities they secretly wish they possessed. Confidence, kindness, intelligence, leadership, or emotional stability can all become sources of irritation because they reflect something missing within themselves. This trait reveals someone whose self-worth depends on comparison rather than personal growth. Instead of improving themselves, they try to reduce the value of those receiving admiration. Pulling others down feels easier than building themselves up. Genuinely secure people can celebrate another person's success without feeling smaller. Those who resent naturally admired individuals often reveal an inner battle they never resolved. Every compliment directed towards someone else feels like a reminder of their own unmet needs, turning another person's light into something they believe must be dimmed before they can feel seen themselves. Forgetting inconvenient promises. Some people have an excellent memory until keeping their word becomes uncomfortable. The promises that once sounded sincere suddenly become difficult to remember the moment they require sacrifice, effort, or accountability. Forgetting inconvenient promises is the habit of treating commitments as temporary, especially when honoring them no longer serves a personal benefit. They speak with confidence when making promises, but when the time comes to fulfill them, excuses quietly replace responsibility. At first, their explanations may seem believable. They claim they got busy, forgot, misunderstood, or intended to follow through later. Because everyone forgets things occasionally, you naturally give them the benefit of the doubt. But as the pattern repeats, you begin noticing that they rarely forget promises that benefit them. The emotional damage comes from the slow loss of trust. You stop relying on their words because experience has taught you that commitment depends on convenience. Every promise starts feeling uncertain, leaving you to prepare for disappointment before they have even had the chance to keep it. They may become defensive when reminded of what they said, insisting you expect too much or that circumstances changed. Instead of taking ownership, they make the conversation about why the promise should no longer matter. This trait reveals someone who values the comfort of making promises more than the responsibility of keeping them. They enjoy the immediate rewards that commitments bring, whether it is trust, forgiveness, or another chance, but lose interest once action becomes necessary. Real integrity is measured after the promise is made, not while it is being spoken. When someone repeatedly forgets only the commitments that inconvenience them, they reveal that their words are often guided by the moment, while their actions are guided only by personal convenience. Using charm to escape consequences. Some people know exactly when to become likable. The moment accountability approaches, their confidence softens, their humor returns, and their warmth suddenly reappears, making it harder for others to stay focused on what actually happened. Using charm to escape consequences is the habit of relying on charisma, wit, kindness, or friendliness to avoid responsibility instead of addressing harmful behavior. Rather than admitting fault, they distract people with a version of themselves that feels too pleasant to confront. At first, this charm can seem genuine. They make you laugh after an argument, compliment you during difficult conversations, or behave so warmly that bringing up the original issue begins to feel unnecessary. Their personality becomes a distraction from their actions. The emotional damage comes from slowly confusing likability with trustworthiness. You may find yourself overlooking repeated mistakes simply because they know how to make you feel good immediately afterward. Their charm eases the discomfort without repairing the damage that caused it. They often become especially charismatic around people whose opinions matter. Friends, family, or coworkers may only see their pleasant side, making it difficult for others to believe they could behave differently behind closed doors. This trait reveals someone who values being forgiven more than becoming accountable. They understand that people often judge character by how someone makes them feel in the present, rather than by what they repeatedly do over time. True character is revealed when someone accepts the consequences of their actions, not when they successfully avoid them. When charm repeatedly appears only after harmful behavior, it stops being a gift and becomes a strategy, allowing personality to protect patterns that honesty and responsibility should have been forced to confront, guilt-tripping others for having needs. Some people are comfortable asking for endless understanding, but the moment you express your own needs, they make you feel selfish for even bringing them up. Your request for care somehow becomes evidence that you do not care enough about them. Guilt-tripping others for having needs is the habit of making someone feel guilty whenever they ask for time, support, respect, or emotional attention. Instead of responding with understanding, they treat those needs as burdens, inconveniences, or personal attacks. At first, the guilt may be subtle. They sigh, become unusually quiet, or remind you of everything they are already dealing with. Rather than discussing your concerns, they shift the focus to their own struggles, leaving you feeling ashamed for asking in the first place. The emotional damage comes from learning to ignore yourself. You begin believing that your needs are too much, your feelings are unreasonable, or your expectations are unfair. Over time, you stop speaking up, convincing yourself that silence is kinder than honesty. They may accuse you of being demanding, ungrateful, or insensitive simply because you asked for the same care you have been giving. The conversation quickly becomes about your supposed selfishness instead of the unmet need you were trying to express. This trait reveals someone who wants the relationship to revolve around their emotional world. They are comfortable receiving patience, understanding, and sacrifice, but uncomfortable when those same things are expected from them. Healthy relationships allow both people to have needs without guilt. When someone repeatedly makes you feel ashamed for asking to be heard, respected, or supported, they are not protecting the relationship. They are protecting a dynamic where your silence keeps them comfortable and your self-neglect quietly becomes the price of staying close to them. Collecting secrets while sharing little. Some people are fascinated by your inner world, but keep the door to their own tightly locked. They encourage you to speak openly, reveal your fears, and confess your mistakes, while revealing almost nothing meaningful about themselves. Collecting secrets while sharing little is the habit of gathering personal information without offering the same level of openness in return. They ask thoughtful questions, remember intimate details, and make you feel deeply understood, yet their own life remains surprisingly difficult to know. At first, this imbalance may seem harmless. You assume they are simply private, good listeners, or naturally curious, but over time, you realize the conversations always flow in one direction. They know your struggles, your regrets, your dreams, and your weaknesses, while you know very little about theirs. The emotional damage comes from mistaking information for intimacy. You feel emotionally close because you have shared so much, but genuine closeness requires mutual vulnerability. Instead, the relationship slowly becomes uneven, leaving one person exposed while the other remains protected. They may avoid personal questions by changing the subject, asking another question, or giving vague answers that reveal almost nothing. The focus quickly returns to you, making the imbalance feel normal. This trait reveals someone who values access more than mutual trust. Information gives them influence, while privacy protects them from being equally vulnerable. The more they know about you, the easier it becomes to predict your reactions, understand your fears, and shape your decisions. Healthy relationships are built on shared openness, not one-sided disclosure. When someone eagerly collects your deepest secrets while carefully guarding their own, they may be seeking knowledge, leverage, or control, rather than the genuine emotional closeness they appear to offer. Giving affection unpredictably. Some people make love feel impossible to predict. One day they are warm, attentive, and deeply affectionate. The next day they become distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable without any clear explanation. Giving affection unpredictably is the habit of offering love and attention inconsistently, leaving another person constantly wondering where they stand. Instead of creating emotional stability, they alternate between closeness and distance, making affection feel like something that appears without warning and disappears just as quickly. At first, the changes may seem understandable. Everyone has difficult days or moments when they need space. But when the pattern repeats without honest communication, uncertainty begins replacing security. You never know which version of them you will meet. The emotional damage comes from becoming emotionally dependent on the moments of warmth. Because affection is unpredictable, every kind gesture feels unusually valuable. You begin chasing the feeling of connection, hoping that if you say the right thing or behave the right way, the loving version of them will return. They may not even recognize the effect this inconsistency has, or they may understand it very well, knowing that unpredictability keeps your attention focused on earning back the affection you once received. This trait reveals someone who creates emotional instability instead of emotional safety. Whether intentional or not, inconsistent affection trains the mind to become preoccupied with seeking approval rather than enjoying genuine connection. The relationship slowly becomes driven by hope instead of trust. Real love is not measured by how intense it feels during good moments, but by how dependable it remains through ordinary ones. When affection becomes unpredictable, the relationship often begins to resemble an emotional gamble, where uncertainty keeps one person invested while consistency quietly disappears from the bond. Acting kind. When access is threatened. Some people become their kindest selves only when they feel they are about to lose you. The warmth that was missing for weeks or months suddenly returns the moment you begin creating distance, setting boundaries, or preparing to walk away. Acting kind when access is threatened is the habit of showing affection, generosity, or concern only after realizing that someone's time, attention, or loyalty is no longer guaranteed. Instead of valuing the relationship consistently, they become caring only when they fear losing the benefits it provides. At first, the change can feel genuine. They apologize, become more attentive, remember the little things, and make promises about the future. Their behavior is so different that it becomes easy to believe they have finally understood your value. The emotional damage comes from confusing fear of loss with real transformation. You may interpret their sudden kindness as lasting growth when it may simply be a temporary response to the possibility of losing control or access. Once they feel secure again, the urgency often fades. The thoughtful messages become less frequent, the effort slowly disappears, and familiar patterns quietly return. The kindness was tied to the threat, not necessarily to a lasting change in character. This trait reveals someone who responds more strongly to losing privilege than to causing pain. They were capable of showing care all along, but chose to express it only when the relationship no longer felt guaranteed. Healthy relationships are built through consistent effort, not emergency affection. When kindness appears only after you begin leaving, it raises an important question. Are they fighting for you, or are they fighting to keep the place they once assumed they would never lose? Treating boundaries as attacks. Some people feel comfortable as long as they have unlimited access to your time, energy, and emotions. The moment you begin protecting those things, they stop seeing your boundary as healthy and start seeing it as rejection. Treating boundaries as attacks is the habit of responding to another person's limits with anger, guilt, or defensiveness instead of respect. Rather than recognizing that boundaries create healthier relationships, they interpret them as personal insults or signs that they are no longer important. At first, the reaction may seem emotional, but understandable. They ask why you are changing, accuse you of becoming distant, or insist that you never acted this way before. Instead of trying to understand your reasons, they focus on how your boundary makes them feel. The emotional damage comes from making self-respect feel selfish. You begin questioning whether protecting your peace is unfair, whether saying no makes you unkind, or whether asking for space means you are hurting someone you care about. They may pressure you to explain yourself repeatedly, hoping that guilt will eventually make you remove the boundary altogether. If that fails, they may become cold, offended, or portray themselves as the victim of your decision. This trait reveals someone who values unrestricted access more than mutual respect. Your boundary threatens the control, convenience, or emotional influence they once enjoyed. What they miss is not always the closeness itself, but the freedom to cross lines without consequence. Healthy people may feel disappointed by a boundary, but they still respect it. Someone who treats every limit as a personal attack is often revealing that they benefited from your lack of boundaries far more than they ever benefited from your genuine well-being or peace of mind. Keeping score of every favor. Some people never truly let a favor go. Even after helping you with a smile, they quietly remember every sacrifice, every act of kindness, and every moment they gave more than they received, waiting for the day those memories become useful. Keeping score of every favor is the habit of treating kindness like a running account instead of a sincere gift. Rather than helping because they genuinely care, they mentally record every favor, expecting repayment in loyalty, attention, forgiveness, or future obedience. At first, their generosity feels thoughtful and dependable. They are always willing to assist, offer advice, or step in when life becomes difficult. But over time, those past acts of kindness begin returning during disagreements or moments when they want something from you. The emotional damage comes from realizing that nothing was ever truly free. Every favor carries invisible expectations, making gratitude slowly transform into obligation. You begin feeling guilty whenever you disagree with them, because you know they can remind you of everything they have done on your behalf. They may say things like, "After everything I've done for you," using past generosity to silence your concerns or pressure you into giving in. Instead of discussing the current issue, they turn old kindness into emotional leverage. This trait reveals someone who values the power that generosity creates more than the joy of helping. Their kindness becomes less about lifting others up and more about building influence that can be collected later. Real generosity does not demand repayment long after the gift has been given. When someone constantly keeps score, they quietly turn relationships into transactions, where every act of kindness earns interest and every disagreement is treated like an unpaid debt that must eventually be settled, regardless of how much genuine love once existed between you. Weaponizing insecurities. During arguments. Some people do not fight to solve problems, they fight to win. When emotions rise, they reach for the deepest fears, private confessions, and personal insecurities you once trusted them to protect. Weaponizing insecurities during arguments is the habit of using another person's vulnerabilities as emotional weapons. Instead of addressing the actual disagreement, they attack sensitive areas they know will cause the greatest pain, believing that hurting you gives them the upper hand. At first, these comments may seem like angry words spoken in the heat of the moment, but when the same insecurities are repeatedly brought into different arguments, a pattern begins to emerge. The information is no longer accidental, it is being used deliberately. The emotional damage reaches far beyond the argument itself. The person who once made you feel safe now becomes the source of your deepest emotional wounds. You begin regretting every vulnerable conversation because the trust you offered has been turned against you. They may mock your appearance, question your abilities, bring up painful childhood experiences, or remind you of past failures that have nothing to do with the disagreement. The goal is not understanding. The goal is emotional defeat. This trait reveals someone who sees vulnerability as an opportunity rather than a responsibility. They understand exactly where your emotional scars are, and instead of protecting them, they press on them whenever they feel threatened. Healthy conflict focuses on resolving the issue without destroying the person. Someone who repeatedly uses your insecurities as weapons is revealing that winning matters more to them than preserving trust. Once private pain becomes ammunition, the relationship stops feeling like a place of safety and begins feeling like a battlefield where honesty itself becomes dangerous. Enjoying another person's embarrassment. Some people smile a little too easily when someone else is humiliated. Instead of feeling uncomfortable or offering support, they seem entertained by another person's awkwardness, failure, or public discomfort. Enjoying another person's embarrassment is the habit of finding pleasure in moments that damage someone else's confidence or dignity. They may laugh longer than everyone else, repeat the story to others, or quietly encourage situations that place another person in an uncomfortable position. At first, they dismiss it as harmless humor. They insist everyone should learn to laugh at themselves or claim they were only joking. But the pattern becomes clear when their amusement consistently depends on someone else's discomfort rather than shared enjoyment. The emotional damage comes from feeling unsafe around them. Instead of trusting that your mistakes will be met with understanding, you begin worrying that every awkward moment will become another source of entertainment. The relationship slowly loses its sense of emotional safety. They often pay special attention to embarrassing moments because those moments temporarily lower another person's confidence. Seeing someone else struggle can make them feel more secure about themselves without having to improve their own character or abilities. This trait reveals someone who builds self-worth through comparison rather than compassion. Another person's humiliation becomes a shortcut to feeling superior. Instead of lifting themselves higher, they feel better when someone else appears smaller. Healthy people may laugh with others during lighthearted moments, but they know when laughter becomes cruelty. Someone who genuinely enjoys another person's embarrassment often reveals a deeper lack of empathy. Their entertainment depends on another person's pain, exposing a character that values emotional advantage over kindness, dignity, and genuine human connection. Taking credit and shifting blame. Some people are always present when success is celebrated, but strangely absent when mistakes must be owned. Victories quickly become their achievement, while failures somehow become everyone else's responsibility. Taking credit and shifting blame is the habit of claiming praise for positive outcomes while avoiding accountability for negative ones. They highlight their contributions when things go well, but minimize their role or point to someone else when problems arise. At first, this behavior may be difficult to notice. They casually mention their involvement in successful moments and quietly leave out the efforts of others. When things go wrong, they explain why the circumstances, the team, or another person should carry most of the responsibility. The emotional damage comes from feeling invisible when you succeed and exposed when things fail. Your hard work is overlooked while your mistakes are magnified. Over time, this creates resentment because fairness slowly disappears from the relationship. They often become skilled at controlling the narrative. They share enough information to make themselves appear capable and dependable, while carefully leaving out details that would reveal their own mistakes. Their image remains protected, even when others pay the price. This trait reveals someone who values recognition more than integrity. They are more concerned with preserving a positive reputation than giving honest credit or accepting deserved responsibility. Success becomes something to possess, while failure becomes something to escape. Healthy people understand that achievement is often shared and that mistakes are opportunities for growth. Someone who constantly takes credit and shifts blame is not protecting the truth. They are protecting their image at the expense of fairness, trust, and the people who helped them succeed. Eventually, others begin noticing that their confidence grows only when someone else is left carrying the weight of their failures. Pretending support while hoping for failure. Some people clap the loudest when you announce your goals, yet quietly hope you never reach them. Their encouragement sounds sincere, but beneath the smiles is the fear that your success will expose their own lack of progress. Pretending support while hoping for failure is the habit of offering encouragement on the surface while secretly wishing that another person's dreams never become reality. They want to appear supportive because that protects their image, but your success creates emotions they would rather not admit. At first, they celebrate your plans, praise your potential, and tell you they believe in you. But as your progress becomes real, their excitement begins to fade. Compliments become less frequent, enthusiasm disappears, and subtle criticism quietly takes its place. The emotional damage comes from trusting someone who is emotionally invested in your disappointment. You may share your victories expecting celebration, only to receive forced smiles, lukewarm responses, or conversations that quickly shift back to them. They often become unusually interested in your setbacks. Your failures receive more attention than your achievements because those moments restore the emotional balance they secretly preferred. Seeing you struggle makes your growth feel less threatening to their own self-worth. This trait reveals someone who measures life through comparison instead of personal development. Rather than being inspired by another person's success, they quietly hope circumstances will bring everyone back to the same level. Real supporters celebrate your progress even when it surpasses their own. Someone who secretly hopes you fail is not protecting the friendship or relationship. They are protecting their ego from the uncomfortable reality that your growth forces them to face their own fears, excuses, or unrealized potential. Resenting another person's confidence. Some people become uncomfortable when they meet someone who genuinely believes in themselves. Quiet confidence reminds them of the self-acceptance they have not yet found, and instead of feeling inspired, they quietly begin looking for ways to bring that confidence down. Resenting another person's confidence is the habit of reacting negatively to someone who is secure in their abilities, values, or identity. Rather than appreciating healthy self-belief, they mistake it for arrogance, believing confidence must be challenged instead of respected. At first, the resentment may be subtle. They make sarcastic remarks, dismiss achievements, or constantly point out flaws that no one else seems concerned about. They insist they are simply keeping the confident person humble, when in reality they are uncomfortable watching someone who does not seek constant approval. The emotional damage comes from teaching people to hide their strengths. Someone who is repeatedly criticized for believing in themselves may begin shrinking their personality, minimizing accomplishments, or pretending to be less capable just to avoid becoming a target. They often feel most threatened by confidence that does not depend on praise. A person who knows their worth without needing validation is difficult to influence, compare, or control. That independence quietly challenges the emotional advantage they wish to maintain. This trait reveals someone whose self-worth depends on comparison rather than inner security. Instead of building their own confidence, they try to reduce someone else's until everyone appears equally uncertain. Healthy people celebrate confidence because they understand it creates stronger relationships and healthier communities. Someone who resents another person's confidence is often revealing an inner battle with inadequacy where another person's self-belief feels less like inspiration and more like an uncomfortable reminder of the peace they have not yet learned to give themselves. Creating urgency to pressure. Decisions. Some people know that rushed decisions are rarely wise. That is exactly why they make you feel as though there is no time to think. Before you can reflect, ask questions, or trust your instincts, they convince you that acting immediately is your only safe option. Creating urgency to pressure decisions is the habit of making someone feel that a choice must be made instantly, even when no real emergency exists. They understand that pressure weakens judgment, so they replace careful thinking with fear of missing out, disappointing others, or losing an opportunity forever. At first, the urgency sounds convincing. They insist this is your last chance, claim someone else is waiting, or warn that everything will change if you do not decide right away. The situation feels so immediate that slowing down begins to feel irresponsible. The emotional damage comes from making you distrust your own pace. Instead of listening to your judgment, you begin reacting to their pressure. Important choices become driven by anxiety rather than clarity, leaving you with decisions you never had enough time to evaluate. They often become impatient when you ask for time to think. They may accuse you of overthinking, being difficult, or failing to appreciate the opportunity. In reality, your hesitation threatens the emotional pressure they worked hard to create. This trait reveals someone who fears informed decisions because informed people are harder to influence. The less time you have to reflect, the more likely you are to accept what benefits them instead of what protects you. Healthy people respect your need to think before making important choices. Someone who constantly creates false urgency is often trying to control your decisions before your confidence, logic, or intuition has the chance to catch up with the pressure they deliberately created. Exhausting others to win arguments. Some people do not win arguments because they are right. They win because they refuse to stop. They keep talking, repeating, arguing, and challenging until the other person becomes too mentally drained to continue. Exhausting others to win arguments is the habit of wearing people down instead of honestly resolving disagreements. Rather than listening, reflecting, or accepting responsibility, they stretch conversations for hours, constantly introducing new points, changing the subject, or forcing endless explanations until the other person gives up. At first, their persistence may seem like determination. They insist they simply want to clear things up or fully understand the situation. But as the conversation continues, you realize there is no finish line. Every answer creates another question. Every explanation leads to another accusation, and every resolution becomes the beginning of another debate. The emotional damage comes from confusing surrender with agreement. Eventually, you stop arguing, not because you believe they are right, but because you no longer have the emotional energy to defend yourself. Your silence becomes their proof that they won. They often mistake endurance for truth. In their mind, the person who keeps talking the longest deserves to be believed, regardless of whether the facts support their position. The goal quietly shifts from finding understanding to outlasting the other person. This trait reveals someone who values victory more than resolution. They see conflict as something to conquer rather than something to repair. By exhausting your patience, attention, and emotional strength, they create the illusion that they were correct all along. Healthy disagreements end when both people feel heard. Someone who deliberately drains your energy until you stop responding is not searching for truth. They are using exhaustion as a weapon, hoping your silence will achieve what honesty, evidence, and accountability never could. Allowing useful misunderstandings to continue. Some people do not lie directly. They simply stay quiet while someone else believes something that works in their favor. They know the misunderstanding exists, but correcting it would cost them an advantage they are not willing to lose. Allowing useful misunderstandings to continue is the habit of deliberately avoiding clarification when another person's false assumption provides personal benefit. Instead of correcting the confusion, they quietly encourage it through silence, vague responses, or carefully chosen words that never fully reveal the truth. At first, this behavior can seem innocent. They claim they never actually said anything untrue or insist that nobody asked the right question. Technically, they may not have lied, yet they knowingly allowed another person to believe something that was false because the misunderstanding served their interests. The emotional damage comes from discovering that your trust was manipulated through omission rather than direct deception. You realize the truth was available all along, but they intentionally kept it hidden because your misunderstanding made life easier for them. They often defend themselves by focusing on exact wording instead of honest intention. They argue that they cannot be blamed for assumptions they never corrected, even though they recognize those assumptions from the very beginning. This trait reveals someone who values plausible deniability more than genuine honesty. They understand that silence can influence people just as powerfully as spoken words. By allowing confusion to continue, they avoid responsibility while still enjoying the rewards that the misunderstanding creates. Healthy people clarify important misunderstandings because trust matters more than temporary advantage. Someone who repeatedly benefits from your false beliefs while refusing to correct them is not protecting your relationship. They are protecting an outcome that depends on you remaining uninformed for as long as possible. Pretending neutrality while manipulating both sides. Some people never openly choose a side because remaining in the middle gives them the greatest advantage. They appear calm, reasonable, and fair, while quietly influencing both sides in ways that keep conflict alive and themselves in control. Pretending neutrality while manipulating both sides is the habit of presenting yourself as impartial while secretly encouraging misunderstandings, sharing selective information, or saying different things to different people. They avoid appearing responsible because their influence works best when no one realizes they are directing the situation. At first, they seem like the perfect mediator. They listen carefully, agree with everyone, and promise they only want peace. Both sides believe they have found someone trustworthy because this person appears understanding and supportive during every private conversation. The emotional damage comes from believing you have an ally when you actually have an audience. Personal conversations meant to build trust quietly become opportunities for them to gather information, shape opinions, and control how each side sees the other. They often tell each person exactly what they want to hear while leaving out the parts that could resolve the conflict. Instead of encouraging honest communication, they become the bridge that both people depend on, giving them influence over every interaction. This trait reveals someone who values control more than resolution. If the disagreement ends, so does the position of importance they created for themselves. Their neutrality is not designed to heal relationships, but to preserve their place at the center of them. Healthy mediators work to bring people together through honesty and transparency. Someone who secretly manipulates both sides while pretending to be impartial is not protecting peace. They are protecting a position where confusion, mistrust, and dependence allow them to quietly shape outcomes without ever appearing responsible for the damage they helped create. Hiding insults inside compliments. Some people rarely criticize you directly. Instead, they wrap hurtful words inside praise, making it difficult to challenge them without appearing overly sensitive or ungrateful. The compliment is only the cover. The insult is the real message. Hiding insults inside compliments is the habit of disguising criticism as admiration. They may praise your success while implying you were simply lucky, compliment your appearance while pointing out a flaw, or congratulate you in a way that quietly diminishes your achievement. The words sound positive, but they leave you feeling unexpectedly smaller. At first, these remarks can be confusing. You wonder whether they were genuinely being kind or whether you misunderstood their intention. Because the statement contains praise, confronting it feels uncomfortable, allowing the hidden insult to pass without accountability. The emotional damage comes from the uncertainty it creates. Instead of enjoying genuine encouragement, you begin questioning every compliment they give. You find yourself analyzing their words, searching for the hidden criticism that often follows the praise. They usually defend themselves by insisting you are reading too much into the conversation. If you express hurt, they claim they were only trying to compliment you, making your reaction seem unreasonable instead of addressing the effect of their words. This trait reveals someone who wants to lower your confidence without appearing openly hostile. Direct insults would expose their intentions, but disguised criticism allows them to protect their image while quietly damaging yours. Healthy compliments leave people feeling appreciated, respected, and encouraged. Someone who repeatedly hides criticism inside praise is not celebrating your strengths. They are carefully weakening them while maintaining the appearance of kindness, creating a relationship where every encouraging word carries the uncomfortable possibility of concealed disrespect or quiet emotional manipulation, redirecting every conversation to themselves. Some people can listen for only a few moments before the conversation quietly becomes about them. No matter where the discussion begins, it somehow ends with their experiences, their struggles, their opinions, or their achievements taking center stage. Redirecting every conversation to themselves is the habit of shifting attention away from others in order to remain the emotional focus. They may appear interested at first, but instead of exploring your thoughts or feelings, they quickly connect everything back to their own life, making your story feel like a stepping stone to theirs. At first, this behavior can seem like an attempt to relate. Sharing personal experiences is a natural part of conversation, but over time, you notice a pattern. Your victories become opportunities for them to describe bigger successes. Your problems become invitations for them to explain how they have suffered even more. The emotional damage comes from feeling unseen. You begin realizing that your thoughts are rarely explored because every meaningful conversation is redirected before your experience has the chance to matter. Instead of feeling understood, you feel like an audience. They may interrupt before you finish speaking, change the subject without noticing, or answer your emotions with stories about themselves. The focus quietly shifts away from your needs until you stop expecting genuine attention altogether. This trait reveals someone who measures conversations by the attention they receive rather than the connection they create. They often mistake being heard for being close, leaving little room for anyone else's emotional world. Healthy conversations move naturally between both people. Someone who constantly redirects every discussion back to themselves is not always seeking understanding. They are seeking significance, believing that remaining the center of attention is more important than making another person feel genuinely heard, valued, and emotionally understood. Competing with non-competitive people. Some people turn ordinary relationships into contests that no one else knows they are playing. They compare achievements, attention, happiness, and success, even when the other person has no interest in competing at all. Competing with non-competitive people is the habit of treating everyday interactions like battles for superiority. Instead of enjoying another person's growth or simply existing alongside them, they constantly measure who is doing better, receiving more recognition, or appearing more successful. At first, this behavior may seem harmless. They make playful comparisons, mention their own accomplishments, or casually point out where they performed better. But over time, you notice they rarely celebrate your victories without finding a way to make themselves part of the story. The emotional damage comes from losing the comfort of genuine companionship. A relationship that should feel supportive slowly becomes exhausting because every conversation carries an invisible comparison. Your success feels like their defeat, even though you were never trying to compete. They may become unusually quiet when you achieve something meaningful or quickly mention their own accomplishments to reclaim attention. Instead of sharing your happiness, they instinctively search for a way to restore the balance in their favor. This trait reveals someone whose self-worth depends on standing above others rather than growing alongside them. They struggle to appreciate another person's progress because every achievement becomes a reflection of what they believe they are lacking. Healthy people understand that someone else's success does not reduce their own value. Someone who constantly competes with people who are not competing reveals an inner insecurity that cannot enjoy connection without comparison. In their mind, every relationship becomes a race, even when everyone else simply wanted to walk the journey together. Disrespecting those with less power. Some people reveal their true character only when they believe there will be no consequences. They are polite to those who can benefit them, but become impatient, dismissive, or cruel toward people who have less influence, status, or authority. Disrespecting those with less power is the habit of treating people differently based on what they can offer in return. Instead of showing equal respect to everyone, they reserve kindness for those they admire or fear, while looking down on those they believe cannot affect their own success. At first, this behavior may be easy to miss. They appear charming in important meetings, respectful toward powerful individuals, and generous when their reputation is visible. But the pattern changes around service workers, junior employees, children, or anyone they consider less important. Their patience disappears because they no longer feel the need to impress. The emotional damage extends beyond the immediate interaction. It creates environments where people feel invisible, undervalued, and afraid to speak. Respect becomes something that must be earned through status instead of something given because every person has dignity. They often justify their behavior by claiming certain people deserve harsher treatment or simply need to work harder. In reality, they are measuring human value by usefulness rather than character. This trait reveals someone who confuses power with worth. They believe respect should flow upward toward influence instead of outward toward humanity. Their kindness becomes selective, changing according to the position of the person standing in front of them. The clearest measure of character is not how someone treats those above them, but how they treat those who have nothing to offer. When respect depends on status, it is no longer respect. It is self-interest disguised as good manners. Flattering, influential people. Some people become unusually warm whenever they are around someone with power, status, or influence. Their compliments become more frequent, their agreement becomes automatic, and their personality shifts to match whoever holds the greatest advantage. Flattering, influential people is the habit of offering excessive praise to those who can provide opportunities, protection, or recognition. Their admiration often has less to do with genuine respect and more to do with gaining favor, access, or personal benefit. At first, this behavior can appear as simple politeness. They compliment achievements, express admiration, and eagerly support the opinions of influential people. But over time, the pattern becomes obvious. Their enthusiasm changes depending on the person's status, while those with less influence receive far less attention or appreciation. The emotional damage comes from creating relationships built on usefulness instead of sincerity. Genuine respect is replaced by calculated approval, making it difficult to know whether any compliment is real or simply another attempt to gain an advantage. They rarely challenge powerful people, even when they privately disagree. Instead, they adjust their opinions, laugh at jokes they do not find funny, and avoid difficult truths that could threaten the relationship. Their honesty quietly disappears whenever influence enters the room. This trait reveals someone who values opportunity more than authenticity. They believe praise is a tool that opens doors, making admiration something to trade rather than something to earn. Their words become carefully chosen investments instead of honest expressions of respect. Healthy people admire others because of their character, not because of their position. Someone who constantly flatters influential people often reveals that they are chasing proximity to power rather than meaningful connection. Their loyalty follows status, their praise follows opportunity, and their personality changes according to whoever holds the greatest influence at the moment. Treating workers as invisible. Some people are polite only when they believe someone is important. The moment they interact with a cleaner, cashier, waiter, driver, receptionist, or anyone they consider beneath their status, their kindness quietly disappears. Treating workers as invisible is the habit of ignoring, dismissing, or disrespecting people whose roles are based on service. Instead of recognizing their humanity, they act as though these individuals exist only to perform tasks, not to deserve basic respect, appreciation, or courtesy. At first, the behavior may seem small. They avoid eye contact, refuse to say thank you, interrupt while someone is speaking, or speak about workers as though they are not standing there. Over time, these moments reveal a consistent pattern rather than an occasional lapse in manners. The emotional damage reaches far beyond a single interaction. Being treated as invisible slowly erodes dignity, making people feel unseen despite the work they do every day. Small acts of disrespect repeated often can leave lasting emotional scars. They usually justify their behavior by believing respect should be earned through status, education, wealth, or authority. Because they view certain roles as less valuable, they convince themselves that basic courtesy is unnecessary. This trait reveals someone who measures human worth by position instead of character. Their kindness is selective, reserved for people who can improve their reputation, advance their goals, or offer something in return. Respect becomes a strategy instead of a principle. The strongest character is often revealed in moments where nothing can be gained. Someone who ignores or disrespects workers is showing how they treat people when there is no reward for being kind. Their behavior exposes a mindset that values social hierarchy more than human dignity, compassion, and equal respect for every individual, mocking sincerity as weakness. Some people become uncomfortable around genuine kindness, honest emotion, or heartfelt vulnerability. Instead of appreciating sincerity, they laugh at it, dismiss it, or treat it as proof that someone is naive and easy to exploit. Mocking sincerity as weakness is the habit of ridiculing people who express genuine care, compassion, or authenticity. They believe emotional openness makes a person less intelligent, less powerful, or less capable of surviving in the real world. To them, kindness is not a strength, but a flaw waiting to be used against someone. At first, the mockery may sound like harmless humor. They joke about people who care too much, roll their eyes at acts of generosity, or describe emotionally honest individuals as soft, desperate, or unrealistic. But over time, their attitude reveals a deeper discomfort with vulnerability itself. The emotional damage comes from teaching others to hide what is healthiest about them. People begin suppressing affection, avoiding honest conversations, or pretending not to care because they fear becoming the next target of ridicule. Authenticity slowly gives way to emotional performance. They often admire emotional distance because they mistake it for strength. Someone who never expresses feelings appears powerful in their eyes, while those who openly care are seen as weak or foolish. This belief prevents them from experiencing the deeper trust that sincere relationships require. This trait reveals someone who confuses emotional protection with emotional maturity. Instead of learning how to handle vulnerability, they reject it altogether. Mockery becomes a shield that protects them from facing the parts of themselves they have never allowed to be seen. True strength is not the absence of emotion, but the courage to express it wisely. Someone who constantly mocks sincerity often reveals a fear of genuine connection, where pretending not to care feels safer than risking the honesty that real relationships demand. Rejecting advice while demanding help. Some people constantly ask for help, yet rarely accept the guidance they receive. They return with the same problems again and again, expecting support while refusing every solution that could actually change their situation. Rejecting advice while demanding help is the habit of seeking constant assistance without any real intention of learning, changing, or taking responsibility. They ask for opinions, encouragement, and emotional support, but dismiss nearly every suggestion that requires effort, accountability, or uncomfortable growth. At first, this behavior may seem like confusion or uncertainty. You patiently explain different options, offer practical solutions, and genuinely hope to help. But after countless conversations, you realize the outcome never changes because the problem is not a lack of answers, it is a resistance to applying them. The emotional damage comes from feeling emotionally drained. You invest your time, energy, and concern only to watch the same cycle repeat. Eventually, your willingness to help turns into frustration because every conversation ends exactly where it began. They often become defensive when advice challenges their habits or beliefs. Instead of considering a different perspective, they quickly explain why every solution will fail. Yet despite rejecting your guidance, they continue expecting your attention whenever the problem returns. This trait reveals someone who wants the comfort of support more than the discomfort of change. They may value the emotional reassurance of being helped while avoiding the responsibility that real growth demands. In many cases, remaining stuck feels safer than facing the uncertainty that comes with doing something different. Healthy people ask for help because they hope to move forward. Someone who repeatedly rejects every solution while demanding endless support is often seeking emotional validation rather than genuine progress, leaving others exhausted by problems that are never truly allowed to be solved. Expecting understanding without giving it. Some people always want others to see things from their perspective, yet rarely make the same effort in return. They expect endless patience for their mistakes, while offering very little patience when someone else falls short. Expecting understanding without giving it is the habit of demanding empathy, compassion, and forgiveness while refusing to extend those same qualities to others. They believe their circumstances should always be considered, but someone else's struggles are often dismissed, questioned, or ignored. At first, this imbalance may seem unintentional, They explain why they reacted the way they did, describe the pressure they were under, or ask you to appreciate how difficult life has been for them. You naturally want to be understanding because everyone faces challenges. The emotional damage appears when you need that same understanding. Instead of receiving patience, you are met with criticism, judgment, or unrealistic expectations. They expect you to excuse their behavior, yet they rarely excuse yours. The compassion always seems to flow in one direction. They often become frustrated if you ask them to see your point of view. Rather than listening with curiosity, they quickly return the conversation to their own feelings, making your experience seem less important than theirs. This trait reveals someone who sees empathy as something to receive rather than something to practice. They enjoy being understood, but resist the emotional effort required to understand someone else. Relationships slowly become unbalanced because one person carries the emotional responsibility for both. Healthy relationships are built on mutual compassion. When someone constantly expects understanding while refusing to offer it, they create a dynamic where your feelings become secondary to theirs. Over time, you stop feeling like an equal partner and begin feeling like an emotional caretaker whose own needs are expected to remain invisible. Using pain to excuse cruelty. Some people carry deep emotional wounds, but instead of healing from them, they use those wounds to justify hurting others. Their past becomes an explanation for every harmful choice, as though suffering gives them permission to create more suffering. Using pain to excuse cruelty is the habit of blaming past trauma, disappointment, or hardship for present acts of disrespect, manipulation, or emotional harm. While painful experiences can explain why someone struggles, they never erase personal responsibility for how that pain is expressed. At first, their story naturally awakens compassion. They speak about betrayal, abandonment, loss, or neglect, and you understand why they have difficulty trusting or opening their heart. Their experiences deserve empathy, and their pain is undeniably real. The emotional damage begins when every cruel action is defended by what happened years ago. Instead of apologizing, they remind you of everything they have endured. Instead of changing, they expect others to continually excuse behavior that keeps causing fresh wounds. They may insist that life made them this way, or that people should understand why they react so harshly. While their history may explain certain fears, it does not justify passing those fears onto innocent people who never caused the original pain. This trait reveals someone who has confused explanation with permission. They believe their suffering gives them special exemption from accountability, allowing yesterday's wounds to become today's excuse for hurting others. Real healing does not happen by making others pay for what someone else did. It happens by refusing to let past pain define present character. Someone who constantly uses old wounds to defend new cruelty is often protecting their behavior instead of confronting it, leaving every relationship to carry burdens that belong to a past no one else created. Creating problems, then offering solutions. Some people seem to arrive with the perfect answer every time something goes wrong. What others fail to notice is that the problem often became worse because of their actions in the first place. They create the fire, then enjoy being seen as the one who puts it out. Creating problems, then offering solutions is the habit of causing confusion, conflict, or dependency before presenting yourself as the only person capable of fixing it. This allows someone to appear valuable while quietly increasing their influence over the people around them. At first, their help feels reassuring. They step in with confidence, offer advice, calm the situation, and receive appreciation for solving the issue. Because the solution is visible, few people stop to question how the problem became so serious in the first place. The emotional damage comes from becoming dependent on the very person who keeps creating your difficulties. You begin believing they are your greatest source of stability, unaware that much of the instability exists because they benefit from being needed. They may spread misunderstandings, create unnecessary urgency, encourage conflict, or weaken your confidence, only to return later with comfort, guidance, or reassurance. The cycle keeps repeating because every new problem strengthens their importance. This trait reveals someone who values being indispensable more than creating genuine peace. They would rather be the hero in a crisis than prevent the crisis from happening at all. Their identity depends on solving problems, even if those problems must first be manufactured. Healthy people reduce unnecessary conflict because they care about your well-being. Someone who repeatedly creates situations they later rescue you from is not building trust, they are building dependence, making themselves appear essential while quietly ensuring that your sense of security never exists without their continued involvement. Controlling how every conflict appears. Some people are less concerned with resolving conflict than with controlling how the conflict is remembered. Their greatest priority is not what actually happened, but who looks innocent when the story is told. Controlling how every conflict appears is the habit of carefully managing perceptions before, during, and after disagreements. They focus on protecting their image by shaping the narrative, selecting which details to share, and deciding how others should interpret the situation. At first, this behavior can seem like simple self-defense. They explain their side of the story, seek support from friends, or emphasize the parts that make them appear reasonable. But over time, you notice that important facts are consistently omitted, while details that generate sympathy are repeated again and again. The emotional damage comes from feeling as though the truth no longer matters. Instead of discussing what actually happened, you find yourself defending your reputation against a version of events that was carefully edited before anyone else heard it. Your reality begins competing with the image they have already created. They often speak to others before speaking honestly to you. By the time the conflict reaches mutual friends, family, or co-workers, opinions have already been influenced by selective storytelling. This leaves you reacting to a narrative that was designed without your voice. This trait reveals someone who values perception more than resolution. They believe appearing right is more important than making things right. Winning public sympathy becomes more satisfying than repairing private damage, because image offers immediate protection while accountability demands uncomfortable change. Healthy people address conflict with honesty, even when it exposes their own mistakes. Someone who constantly controls how every disagreement appears is not protecting the relationship. They are protecting a reputation that depends on others seeing only the version of events that keeps them looking blameless. Refusing to celebrate others. Some people become strangely quiet when someone else succeeds. They may congratulate you with a smile, but the excitement feels forced, brief, or completely absent. Your happiest moments seem to make them unexpectedly uncomfortable. Refusing to celebrate others is the habit of withholding genuine joy when someone else experiences success, happiness, or recognition. Instead of sharing in another person's achievements, they become emotionally distant, change the subject, or find subtle ways to reduce the importance of what happened. At first, their reaction may seem insignificant. They offer a short congratulations, quickly move on to another topic, or respond with far less enthusiasm than the moment deserves. But as your achievements grow, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The bigger your success, the smaller their support. The emotional damage comes from feeling alone during moments that should bring people closer together. You begin hesitating to share good news because you already expect disappointment instead of encouragement. Over time, your victories become something you celebrate quietly rather than openly. They may immediately compare your achievement to someone else's, remind you of what you still have not accomplished, or redirect the conversation to their own experiences. Instead of allowing your moment to exist, they unconsciously compete with it. This trait reveals someone whose self-worth is threatened by another person's progress. Rather than seeing your success as something inspiring, they experience it as an uncomfortable reminder of what they believe they lack. Healthy relationships make room for each person's victories without comparison or resentment. Someone who consistently refuses to celebrate your growth is not simply being quiet. They are revealing that your happiness feels like a threat to their own sense of value, making genuine support far more difficult than silent competition. Withdrawing when attention shifts. Some people seem fully engaged as long as they remain the center of attention. But the moment someone else is celebrated, comforted, or admired, they quietly pull away, becoming distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable. Withdrawing when attention shifts is the habit of losing interest in a relationship whenever someone else becomes the focus. Rather than feeling happy for another person's moment, they experience the loss of attention as a personal loss of importance. At first, the change may seem subtle. They become quieter than usual, stop participating in conversations, or suddenly appear distracted. But over time, you notice that this pattern repeats whenever praise, concern, or admiration is directed towards someone else instead of them. The emotional damage comes from feeling guilty for receiving attention you never asked for. Instead of enjoying your achievements or sharing your struggles, you begin worrying about how they will react. Your happiest moments become overshadowed by the fear of making them feel overlooked. They may avoid conversations about your success, become emotionally unavailable during your difficult times, or create new problems that shift everyone's focus back onto them. The attention they lost quietly becomes something they try to reclaim. This trait reveals someone whose sense of worth depends heavily on being noticed. Instead of finding security within themselves, they rely on constant recognition to feel valued. When that recognition moves elsewhere, they experience it as rejection rather than a normal part of healthy relationships. Strong relationships allow attention to move naturally between people without creating resentment. Someone who repeatedly withdraws whenever the spotlight leaves them is often revealing an emotional dependence on validation. Their distance is not always about needing space. It is about struggling to feel important when someone else is finally being seen, appreciated, or supported instead of them. Using guilt to stop people leaving. Some people do not ask you to stay because they genuinely want to become better. They make leaving feel so painful, selfish, or cruel that staying begins to feel like the only morally acceptable choice. Using guilt to stop people leaving is the habit of making someone feel responsible for your happiness, stability, or future whenever they try to create distance. Instead of respecting another person's decision, they use emotional pressure to make walking away feel like an act of betrayal. At first, the guilt may sound sincere. They remind you of everything they have done for you, talk about how lost they would be without you, or suggest that leaving proves you never truly cared. Their words are carefully chosen to make compassion overpower your judgment. The emotional damage comes from confusing responsibility with love. You begin believing that protecting their emotions matters more than protecting your own well-being. Instead of asking whether the relationship is healthy, you ask whether you can live with the guilt of ending it. They may describe themselves as abandoned, helpless, or completely dependent on your presence. Every attempt to leave becomes another opportunity to make you feel responsible for pain that is not yours to carry. This trait reveals someone who values keeping access more than respecting freedom. They understand that guilt can hold people in places where love alone no longer can. Rather than becoming someone others freely choose, they create emotional burdens that make choice itself feel impossible. Healthy relationships allow people to stay because they genuinely want to, not because they feel trapped by guilt. Someone who repeatedly makes you feel responsible for their life whenever you step away is not protecting the relationship. They are protecting their control by making your compassion work against your own freedom. Confusing possession with love. Some people believe love means having constant access to another person. They mistake control for commitment, believing that the more they own someone's time, attention, and choices, the deeper the relationship must be. Confusing possession with love is the habit of treating another person as something to keep rather than someone to cherish. Instead of encouraging freedom, trust, and individuality, they believe closeness should come through constant control, monitoring, or exclusivity. At first, their behavior may seem deeply romantic. They want to spend every moment together, constantly check where you are, and insist that no one understands you the way they do. Their intensity can easily be mistaken for devotion because it feels passionate and all-consuming. The emotional damage begins when affection turns into ownership. Your independence starts feeling like disloyalty. Friendships become threats, privacy becomes suspicious, and personal decisions require their approval. Love slowly transforms into permission instead of partnership. They often become anxious whenever you grow more independent or emotionally secure. Rather than celebrating your confidence, they experience it as losing control. The healthier you become, the more they fear becoming unnecessary. This trait reveals someone who measures love by access rather than trust. They believe closeness means reducing your freedom instead of protecting it. Their greatest fear is not losing the relationship itself, but losing the influence they once had over your choices and emotions. Real love allows another person to remain fully themselves. It does not imprison, possess, or demand ownership. Someone who constantly confuses possession with love is often protecting their own insecurity rather than nurturing your happiness. What they call love may actually be the fear of losing control disguised as devotion, making attachment feel stronger than genuine connection. Acting kinder in public. Some people become noticeably warmer the moment other people are watching. Their voice softens, their patience grows, and their kindness suddenly becomes impossible to miss. Yet behind closed doors, that same warmth quietly disappears. Acting kinder in public is the habit of displaying compassion, patience, or generosity mainly when it improves how others see you. Their behavior changes depending on the audience, making public interactions feel loving while private moments reveal a completely different personality. At first, this contrast can be difficult to recognize. Friends, family, and co-workers often describe them as thoughtful and considerate because they only witness the version carefully presented to the outside world. The person closest to them, however, experiences criticism, coldness, or emotional neglect that no one else ever sees. The emotional damage comes from feeling trapped between two realities. You know how they behave in private, but everyone around you admires the image they project. This makes you question your own experiences because the public version seems so convincing. They may become affectionate during social gatherings, defend you in front of others, or speak about you with admiration. Yet once the audience disappears, the affection fades, replaced by indifference, irritation, or emotional distance. Their kindness follows visibility rather than sincerity. This trait reveals someone who values admiration more than authenticity. They are deeply invested in appearing compassionate because reputation matters more than consistent character. Their public kindness is carefully maintained while their private behavior remains hidden from those most likely to believe it. Real kindness does not depend on witnesses. Someone who is noticeably kinder only when others are watching is often performing compassion rather than living it. Their greatest concern is not how they treat people, but how people believe they treat them. Making emotional promises. They ignore. Some people make their biggest promises during your most emotional moments. They say exactly what you need to hear when you are hurting, afraid, or ready to leave. But once those emotions settle, the promises quietly disappear. Making emotional promises they ignore is the habit of offering heartfelt commitments to calm a situation without any real intention of following through. Their words are designed to create immediate relief, even if their actions never reflect what they promised. At first, their sincerity feels convincing. They promise to change, to communicate better, to be more present, or to never repeat the same mistake again. In that moment, their emotion appears genuine, making it easy to believe that lasting change has finally begun. The emotional damage comes when hope repeatedly replaces reality. You hold on to their promises because they sounded so heartfelt, only to watch the same behaviors return once the crisis has passed. Each broken promise weakens your trust while strengthening your confusion. They often act surprised when you remind them of what they said. They claim circumstances changed, insist you misunderstood, or behave as though the promise was never as serious as it felt when they made it. The urgency disappears because the immediate threat is gone. This trait reveals someone who values emotional relief more than personal integrity. Their promises are often tools for calming conflict rather than commitments they genuinely plan to honor. They understand that hopeful words can delay consequences, rebuild trust, or prevent someone from walking away. Healthy people know that promises create responsibility, not just comfort. Someone who repeatedly makes emotional commitments they later ignore is not building trust. They are borrowing your hope to protect themselves in the present, while leaving your future to carry the disappointment of promises they never intended to keep. Demanding respect without showing it. Some people expect to be treated with dignity simply because of who they are, yet they rarely extend that same courtesy to anyone else. They believe respect is something they deserve automatically, while others must constantly earn it. Demanding respect without showing it is the habit of expecting admiration, politeness, and consideration while behaving in ways that deny those same qualities to others. They become offended when they feel ignored, interrupted, or criticized, yet think nothing of doing those exact things themselves. At first, their expectations may sound reasonable. They speak about loyalty, manners, and treating people properly. They insist that respect is one of the most important values in any relationship. But their actions tell a different story. They dismiss opinions, ignore boundaries, speak harshly, or belittle people while expecting patience and understanding in return. The emotional damage comes from living under a double standard. You find yourself carefully protecting their feelings while yours are repeatedly overlooked. The relationship becomes one-sided because respect only flows in one direction. They often react strongly when they receive the same treatment they regularly give others. A small criticism feels like a major insult, while their own disrespect is dismissed as honesty, stress, or simply part of their personality. This trait reveals someone who sees respect as a privilege of status rather than a mutual responsibility. They are more interested in being honored than in honoring others. Their behavior is driven by entitlement instead of fairness. Real respect cannot be demanded through authority, fear, or expectation. It grows naturally through consistent actions and mutual consideration. Someone who constantly demands respect while refusing to show it reveals that what they truly want is not respect at all. They want special treatment without accepting equal responsibility. Calling hurtful remarks jokes. Some people say the most painful things with a smile. The moment they see the hurt on your face, they quickly laugh and insist it was only a joke, making you question whether you should have been offended at all. Calling hurtful remarks jokes is the habit of disguising insults, criticism, or humiliation as humor to avoid responsibility. They use comedy as a shield, believing that if something is called a joke, no one has the right to challenge the harm it caused. At first, the comments may seem playful. They tease your appearance, intelligence, mistakes, or insecurities, then immediately laugh as though everyone should find it amusing. If you react honestly, the conversation suddenly becomes about your inability to take a joke instead of the hurtful remark itself. The emotional damage comes from learning to ignore your own feelings. You begin wondering whether you are too sensitive, whether you misunderstood the intention, or whether you should simply laugh along to avoid becoming the problem. Over time, repeated jokes slowly wear down your confidence without anyone openly admitting they were insults. They often choose targets they know are emotionally vulnerable, then hide behind humor whenever they are confronted. The laughter becomes an escape route that allows them to avoid apologizing while placing the blame on your reaction. This trait reveals someone who wants the freedom to wound without the responsibility of owning the wound. They use humor not to create connection, but to create plausible deniability. If the comment is accepted, they enjoy the insult. If it is challenged, they retreat behind the excuse that it was never meant seriously. Healthy humor leaves people feeling included, not diminished. Someone who repeatedly hides cruelty behind jokes is revealing that laughter has become a disguise for disrespect rather than a way of bringing people closer together. Using comparisons to weaken confidence. Some people rarely criticize you directly. Instead, they constantly compare you to someone else. Knowing that comparison can quietly damage confidence without ever sounding like an obvious attack. Using comparisons to weaken confidence is the habit of measuring one person against another to create insecurity, self-doubt, or the feeling of never being enough. They may compare your appearance, success, personality, intelligence, or achievements, making it seem as though your value depends on how well you match someone else. At first, these comparisons may sound harmless. They casually mention how someone else handled a situation better, praise another person's qualities while looking at you, or ask why you cannot be more like someone they admire. Because the words are indirect, the emotional impact often goes unnoticed at first. The emotional damage comes from slowly replacing self-acceptance with constant self-evaluation. Instead of appreciating your own growth, you begin measuring yourself against impossible standards. Every success feels incomplete because there is always someone presented as doing better. They often use comparison to create emotional dependence. The more uncertain you become about your own worth, the more likely you are to seek their approval. Your confidence weakens while their influence quietly grows. This trait reveals someone who understands that insecurity is easier to control than confidence. Rather than encouraging you to become the best version of yourself, they keep your attention focused on what you supposedly lack compared to someone else. Healthy relationships inspire growth without creating shame. Someone who repeatedly uses comparison to motivate, criticize, or influence you is not helping you improve. They are quietly undermining your confidence, hoping that a person who constantly doubts themselves will become easier to influence, easier to satisfy, and far less likely to recognize their own value without outside approval. Giving only when recognition follows. Some people are generous only when someone is watching. Their kindness grows stronger in public, their generosity becomes more visible, and their willingness to help seems to depend on whether anyone will notice. Giving only when recognition follows is the habit of offering help, gifts, or support mainly when it brings praise, admiration, or a better reputation. The act may appear selfless on the surface, but the real reward is often the attention that comes afterward. At first, their generosity seems impressive. They volunteer first, donate publicly, or go out of their way to help others. But over time, you notice a pattern. They lose interest in helping when no appreciation is expected or when their efforts remain unseen. The emotional damage comes from realizing that kindness has become a performance rather than an expression of genuine care. People begin feeling like props in someone else's search for admiration instead of individuals whose well-being truly matters. They often mention their good deeds during conversations, remind others of what they have done, or become disappointed when their efforts receive little recognition. Instead of quietly appreciating the opportunity to help, they focus on whether their generosity has been properly acknowledged. This trait reveals someone who values applause more than compassion. Their giving is guided less by another person's need and more by the emotional reward of being seen as generous. Recognition becomes the true motivation behind the act. Real generosity continues even when no one is watching and no praise is guaranteed. Someone who gives only when recognition follows is not simply helping others. They are carefully investing in an image they want the world to admire. The kindness may still benefit people, but its deepest purpose is often to feed the person's need for approval rather than their desire to genuinely serve. Interrupting to reclaim attention. Some people seem comfortable listening only until someone else becomes the center of the conversation. The moment another person's story, achievement, or opinion begins attracting attention, they suddenly interrupt and redirect the focus back to themselves. Interrupting to reclaim attention is the habit of cutting into conversations to regain the spotlight. Rather than waiting for the right moment to contribute, they feel an urgent need to become the most noticed voice in the room. Listening becomes difficult because someone else's attention feels like their own loss. At first, the interruptions may appear harmless. They finish your sentences, quickly add their own experiences, or steer the discussion in a different direction. But over time, you notice that these interruptions almost always happen when someone else is receiving interest, praise, or emotional support. The emotional damage comes from feeling unheard. You begin shortening your stories, avoiding personal conversations, or expecting to be interrupted before you even finish speaking. Gradually, your voice becomes quieter because experience has taught you that your moments rarely remain yours for long. They often justify their behavior by claiming they were simply excited, trying to relate, or adding something important. Yet the pattern consistently shifts attention away from others and back toward themselves. This trait reveals someone who measures conversations by visibility rather than connection. They struggle to celebrate another person's moment because attention feels like a limited resource that must constantly be reclaimed. Healthy conversations allow everyone to feel seen without competing for the spotlight. Someone who repeatedly interrupts to redirect attention is not simply eager to speak. They are revealing an emotional dependence on being noticed, making another person's moment feel like something that must be interrupted before it becomes more important than their own. Blaming bad behavior on personality. Some people never deny their hurtful behavior. Instead, they explain it away by saying, "That's just who I am." Their personality becomes a shield that protects them from accountability and removes the pressure to grow. Blaming bad behavior on personality is the habit of using personal traits as excuses for actions that repeatedly hurt others. Rather than accepting responsibility, they claim they are naturally blunt, stubborn, impatient, jealous, or hot-tempered, as though these qualities make change impossible. At first, this honesty can seem refreshing. They openly admit their flaws and appear self-aware, but over time, you realize that their self-awareness never leads to self-improvement. The confession becomes a substitute for change instead of the beginning of it. The emotional damage comes from being expected to endlessly adapt while they remain exactly the same. You become the one adjusting your words, lowering your expectations, and avoiding situations that trigger their behavior, while they continue acting as though growth is someone else's responsibility. They often expect patience because they have already warned you about their personality. If you express hurt, they remind you that they told you how they are, subtly suggesting that your disappointment is your own fault for expecting anything different. This trait reveals someone who confuses self-awareness with self-acceptance. Recognizing a flaw is valuable, but using that flaw as a permanent excuse prevents growth from ever taking place. Their identity becomes more important than the people affected by their actions. Healthy people understand that personality explains behavior, but does not excuse it. Someone who constantly blames hurtful actions on just being themselves is often protecting old habits instead of developing better ones. True character is not revealed by the flaws you admit, but by the effort you make to stop letting those flaws hurt the people around you. Viewing compromise as defeat. Some people enter every disagreement believing that one person must win and the other must lose. To them, meeting in the middle is not a sign of maturity. It is proof that they surrendered something they should have fought to keep. Viewing compromise as defeat is the habit of treating cooperation as weakness rather than wisdom. Instead of looking for solutions that benefit both people, they focus on protecting their position, believing that giving even a little means losing control, respect, or power. At first, this determination may look like confidence. They defend their opinions strongly, refuse to back down easily, and speak as though standing firm is always the right thing to do. But over time, you notice that they resist compromise even when it would clearly improve the relationship. The emotional damage comes from feeling that your needs are never equally important. Every disagreement becomes exhausting because finding common ground is replaced by endless attempts to convince you to accept their way. Your voice slowly carries less weight while theirs becomes the only acceptable outcome. They often see flexibility as a weakness that others will exploit. Rather than viewing compromise as mutual respect, they interpret it as giving away power. As a result, every discussion quietly becomes a contest instead of a conversation. This trait reveals someone who values control more than connection. They believe relationships are strongest when one person leads and the other gives in, making equality feel uncomfortable rather than healthy. Strong relationships are built through cooperation, not domination. Someone who constantly views compromise as defeat is often revealing a deep fear of losing influence. In trying to win every disagreement, they slowly lose something far more valuable: trust, closeness, and the willingness of others to keep meeting them halfway, refusing to apologize first. Some people would rather let a relationship grow cold than be the first to say, "I'm sorry." To them, apologizing feels less like an act of maturity and more like admitting defeat. Refusing to apologize first is the habit of avoiding the first step toward reconciliation, even when they know they contributed to the problem. Instead of taking responsibility, they wait for the other person to break the silence, believing that whoever apologizes first loses the emotional advantage. At first, this behavior may seem like stubbornness. They insist they simply need time to think or believe the other person should reach out because they were hurt too. But as conflicts continue, you notice the pattern never changes. No matter what happened, they expect someone else to make the first move. The emotional damage comes from carrying the responsibility for every repair. You become the one who reaches out, starts difficult conversations, and restores peace, while they remain comfortably passive. Over time, you begin feeling that your efforts keep the relationship alive while theirs are noticeably absent. They often interpret silence as strength. Rather than seeing an apology as an opportunity to rebuild trust, they see it as giving away power. Their pride quietly becomes more important than the relationship itself. This trait reveals someone who values emotional control more than emotional healing. They believe protecting their ego is safer than risking vulnerability, even if that choice allows resentment to grow between people who once cared deeply for each other. Strong relationships survive because both people are willing to take responsibility, even when it is uncomfortable. Someone who refuses to apologize first is often protecting their pride at the expense of genuine connection, allowing distance to grow while waiting for someone else to do the emotional work they were equally responsible for doing. Reusing old mistakes as weapons. Some people never truly let the past stay in the past. Even after saying they have forgiven you, old mistakes quietly return whenever they need an advantage during conflict. What was supposedly resolved becomes a weapon waiting for the right moment. Reusing old mistakes as weapons is the habit of repeatedly bringing up forgiven failures to gain control, win arguments, or make another person feel guilty. Instead of addressing the current issue, they reopen old wounds because they know those memories still carry emotional weight. At first, the reminders may seem understandable. Everyone occasionally reflects on painful experiences. But when the same mistakes appear in unrelated arguments again and again, it becomes clear that the past is no longer being remembered for healing. It is being used for leverage. The emotional damage comes from feeling that forgiveness was never real. No matter how much you change, improve, or take responsibility, you remain trapped inside a version of yourself that they refuse to let go. Growth becomes invisible because your past is always waiting to be brought back. They often introduce old failures at the exact moment they begin losing the current argument. Instead of discussing today's problem, they shift attention toward yesterday's mistakes, making it harder for you to defend yourself without becoming overwhelmed. This trait reveals someone who values emotional advantage more than genuine resolution. They keep old pain alive because it provides a reliable source of guilt whenever they need to regain control or weaken your confidence. Healthy relationships allow people to learn from their past without living inside it forever. Someone who repeatedly turns old mistakes into new weapons is not seeking understanding. They are preserving emotional ammunition, ensuring that your worst moments remain available whenever they need a way to silence, shame, or overpower you. Assuming everyone thinks like them. Some people believe their way of thinking is so natural that they rarely consider anyone else's perspective. They assume others have the same motives, values, and intentions they do, making it difficult for them to truly understand different ways of seeing the world. Assuming everyone thinks like them is the habit of projecting your own mindset onto others instead of recognizing that people can have completely different beliefs, emotions, and motivations. Rather than asking why someone behaved a certain way, they immediately assume they already know the answer because it matches what they themselves would have done. At first, this may seem like confidence or certainty. They quickly explain other people's actions, insist they know exactly what someone was thinking, or dismiss alternative explanations without much consideration. But over time, their certainty begins replacing curiosity, making genuine understanding almost impossible. The emotional damage comes from feeling constantly misunderstood. Your intentions are interpreted through their own way of thinking, instead of your actual words or actions. No matter how carefully you explain yourself, they continue responding to the version of you that exists in their own mind. They often struggle to believe that someone could act out of kindness if they themselves would have acted for personal gain. Likewise, they may assume others are dishonest, controlling, or manipulative simply because those are the motives they expect. This trait reveals someone who mistakes personal experience for universal truth. Instead of accepting that every person has a unique inner world, they believe their own perspective explains everyone else's behavior. As a result, they stop listening and start assuming. Healthy relationships are built on curiosity, not projection. Someone who constantly assumes everyone thinks like they do is often revealing more about their own character than anyone else's because the motives they repeatedly assign to others frequently reflect the beliefs, fears, and habits they carry within themselves. Enjoying admired people's downfall. Some people seem strangely energized when someone respected, successful, or widely admired begins to fail. While others feel disappointment or compassion, they quietly experience satisfaction, as though another person's fall somehow restores balance to their own world. Enjoying admired people's downfall is the habit of taking pleasure in seeing respected individuals lose status, influence, or success. Instead of responding with empathy or fairness, they become unusually interested in every mistake, scandal, or setback that damages another person's reputation. At first, this reaction may appear as simple curiosity. They closely follow bad news, eagerly discuss someone's failure, or repeatedly bring up embarrassing moments long after everyone else has moved on. But over time, you notice they rarely show the same enthusiasm for another person's achievements. The emotional damage comes from creating an environment where success feels dangerous. People become afraid to stand out because admiration is treated as an invitation for others to wait patiently for their downfall. Celebration is replaced by suspicion, and excellence begins to feel risky. They often justify their reaction by claiming that successful people deserve criticism or that they are simply exposing the truth. Yet their interest usually grows strongest when someone's reputation is collapsing, not when they are acting with integrity. This trait reveals someone who measures their own worth through comparison instead of personal growth. Another person's fall provides temporary emotional relief because it reduces the uncomfortable gap they feel between themselves and those they admire or envy. Healthy people can acknowledge another person's mistakes without celebrating their suffering. Someone who genuinely enjoys watching admired people fall often reveals a quiet resentment that has little to do with justice and everything to do with feeling emotionally satisfied when someone else's success is finally brought down to their level. Mistaking patience for permission. Some people mistake another person's patience for endless tolerance. Instead of appreciating kindness, they slowly push more boundaries, believing that the absence of immediate consequences means their behavior is acceptable. Mistaking patience for permission is the habit of interpreting understanding, forgiveness, or self-control as approval to continue harmful behavior. Rather than respecting someone's restraint, they assume they can keep taking, demanding, or disrespecting without ever facing real accountability. At first, the behavior may seem minor. They arrive late, ignore small boundaries, make thoughtless remarks, or repeat habits they have already apologized for. Because the other person responds calmly, they conclude that the issue was never serious in the first place. The emotional damage comes from how quietly respect disappears. The patient person continues giving second chances, hoping kindness will inspire change. Instead, every unchallenged action convinces the other person that they can go even further. What began as patience slowly becomes a relationship built on unequal expectations. They often appear surprised when a firm boundary is finally set. After taking advantage of someone's understanding for so long, they genuinely believe the relationship should continue operating the same way. The sudden consequence feels unfair because they confused delayed accountability with permanent acceptance. This trait reveals someone who values comfort more than gratitude. Instead of appreciating another person's generosity, they see it as an opportunity to demand even more. Their behavior grows worse because they mistake emotional maturity for unlimited access. Healthy people recognize patience as a gift that deserves respect, not exploitation. Someone who repeatedly mistakes patience for permission eventually destroys the trust that made the patience possible. By treating kindness as an invitation to continue harmful behavior, they turn another person's greatest strength into something they quietly abuse until nothing remains but disappointment and emotional exhaustion. Making others compete for affection. Some people never give affection freely. Instead, they make love, attention, and approval feel like prizes that must be earned, leaving others constantly wondering what they need to do to deserve the warmth they once received so easily. Making others compete for affection is the habit of creating emotional rivalry to increase your own sense of importance. They give attention to one person, then suddenly shift it to someone else, making everyone around them feel they must work harder to remain valued. At first, the competition may seem accidental. They compare relationships, praise someone else at carefully chosen moments, or become unusually affectionate toward another person whenever they sense insecurity. Over time, however, the pattern becomes clear. The uncertainty is not random. It keeps people focused on winning back their attention. The emotional damage comes from turning love into a contest instead of a source of safety. Rather than feeling secure in the relationship, you begin measuring yourself against others, wondering whether you are attractive enough, interesting enough, or important enough to deserve consistent affection. They often enjoy being pursued because it confirms their influence. The more people compete for their approval, the more valuable they feel. Genuine connection quietly becomes less important than remaining the person everyone is trying to impress. This trait reveals someone who mistakes emotional scarcity for emotional value. They believe affection becomes more meaningful when it is difficult to obtain, failing to realize that real love grows through consistency, not competition. Healthy relationships make people feel chosen without forcing them to constantly prove their worth. Someone who deliberately creates competition for affection is not strengthening emotional bonds. They are strengthening dependence, ensuring that everyone remains focused on earning something that should have been given freely through trust, honesty, and mutual care rather than through endless emotional rivalry. Using hardship to excuse selfishness, some people have experienced real pain, loss, or disappointment, but instead of allowing those experiences to deepen their compassion, they use them as permanent justification for putting themselves above everyone else. Using hardship to excuse selfishness is the habit of pointing to past struggles whenever current behavior hurts others. They believe their suffering gives them special permission to ignore other people's needs, break promises, or avoid responsibility because life has been unfair to them. At first, their explanation naturally awakens sympathy. They talk about everything they have endured, the sacrifices they have made, or the difficulties they continue to face. Their story is real, and their pain deserves understanding. But gradually, every conversation ends the same way. No matter what they do, hardship becomes the reason they should not be held accountable. The emotional damage comes from feeling that your own needs never matter. Whenever you express disappointment, the focus immediately shifts back to their struggles. Instead of addressing how their actions affected you, they remind you why they deserve more patience than everyone else. They often expect kindness they are unwilling to extend. They ask others to understand their pain, while showing little interest in understanding anyone else's. Compassion becomes something they receive rather than something they practice. This trait reveals someone who has turned suffering into an identity instead of a chapter of their life. Rather than allowing pain to shape better character, they allow it to excuse behavior that keeps hurting the people around them. Hardship can explain why someone struggles, but it never gives permission to become unfair, careless, or self-centered. Someone who repeatedly uses difficult experiences to justify selfishness is often protecting harmful behavior rather than healing from the pain that first created it. Resenting consequences they created. Some people have no trouble making harmful choices, but they become deeply offended when those choices finally produce consequences. They are less upset by what they did than by the fact that someone refused to keep tolerating it. Resenting consequences they created is the habit of blaming others for the results of one's own actions. Instead of accepting that every decision has an outcome, they become angry at the people who enforce boundaries, withdraw trust, or refuse to continue accepting harmful behavior. At first, they often dismiss warnings. They ignore concerns, repeat the same mistakes, or assume they will always receive another chance. But when consequences finally arrive, they react with shock, resentment, or outrage, acting as though they have been treated unfairly. The emotional damage comes from being made to feel guilty for protecting yourself. After finally setting a boundary or walking away, you may find yourself comforting the very person whose actions forced that decision. Their anger shifts attention away from their behavior and onto your response. They often describe consequences as betrayal rather than accountability. Losing trust becomes someone else's fault. Facing rejection becomes proof that people are unforgiving. They rarely stop to ask whether their own choices created the situation they now resent. This trait reveals someone who wants the freedom to act without accepting the responsibility that naturally follows. They enjoy making decisions, but they struggle to accept that every decision carries a price. Healthy people understand that consequences are not punishments for existing. They are the natural results of repeated choices. Someone who constantly resents the outcomes they created is often fighting reality itself, believing life should protect them from accountability, while expecting everyone else to quietly absorb the cost of their behavior instead. Choosing control over peace. Some people would rather live with constant conflict than experience the uncertainty of letting go. To them, control feels safer than harmony, even when that need for control slowly destroys the very relationships they are trying to protect. Choosing control over peace is the habit of prioritizing dominance, certainty, and influence above emotional stability. Instead of allowing trust, compromise, or healthy independence to exist, they constantly try to manage people, conversations, and outcomes so nothing happens outside their control. At first, this behavior may appear responsible. They want everything organized, every decision approved, and every situation carefully managed. But over time, you notice that their need for control creates the very tension they claim they are trying to avoid. The relationship becomes filled with monitoring, correcting, questioning, and unnecessary conflict. The emotional damage comes from living in an environment where nothing ever feels relaxed. Every decision feels watched, every mistake feels dangerous, and every disagreement becomes another attempt to regain control instead of restore understanding. Peace slowly disappears because control never feels complete. They often believe that if they stop controlling people, everything will fall apart. This fear causes them to hold tighter whenever uncertainty appears, making flexibility feel impossible and trust feel risky. This trait reveals someone who mistakes control for security. They believe managing every detail will protect them from disappointment, rejection, or uncertainty. In reality, the harder they try to control everything, the more strained and fragile their relationships become. Healthy relationships are built on trust, not constant supervision. Someone who repeatedly chooses control over peace is often revealing a deep fear of vulnerability. By trying to control every outcome, they sacrifice the calm, freedom, and genuine closeness that only trust can create, leaving everyone emotionally exhausted instead of emotionally secure, demanding trust without earning it. Some people expect to be trusted simply because they ask for it. They become offended when others hesitate, yet rarely stop to consider whether their own actions have actually given anyone a reason to feel secure. Demanding trust without earning it is the habit of expecting confidence, loyalty, and belief without consistently demonstrating honesty, reliability, or integrity. Instead of building trust through repeated actions, they believe it should be given automatically and questioned only at great personal risk. At first, their requests may sound reasonable. They ask you to believe them, insist they would never hurt you, or become frustrated whenever you seek reassurance. They speak as though trust is a gift that should be offered freely, regardless of past behavior. The emotional damage comes from being made to feel guilty for protecting yourself. If you ask reasonable questions or take time to rebuild confidence after being disappointed, they accuse you of being suspicious, unforgiving, or incapable of moving on. Your caution becomes the problem instead of the behavior that created it. They often rely on words more than actions. They promise honesty, loyalty, and change, yet become impatient when those promises alone fail to restore confidence. Rather than rebuilding trust through consistency, they pressure others to ignore their instincts. This trait reveals someone who wants the benefits of trust without accepting the responsibility of earning it. They expect certainty before proving reliability, believing that your belief in them should exist independently of their choices. Real trust is never demanded. It grows naturally through honesty, accountability, and consistent behavior over time. Someone who constantly insists that you trust them while resisting the process of earning that trust is often asking you to ignore experience in favor of hope, placing your confidence ahead of the evidence that should support it. Withdrawing to force reassurance. Some people never directly ask whether they are loved or valued. Instead, they pull away emotionally, become unusually distant, or disappear altogether, waiting to see who comes after them and how hard they will try. Withdrawing to force reassurance is the habit of creating emotional distance in order to make someone chase, comfort, or repeatedly prove their affection. Rather than expressing insecurity honestly, they use absence as a test, hoping another person's reaction will provide the validation they are unwilling to ask for directly. At first, the withdrawal may seem like a need for space. They respond less often, become emotionally unavailable, or suddenly lose interest in conversations that once mattered. Because no explanation is given, you naturally begin searching for what went wrong. The emotional damage comes from constantly feeling responsible for restoring the relationship. You begin sending extra messages, apologizing for things you may not have done, and offering reassurance simply to bring back the warmth that disappeared without warning. Over time, you become conditioned to chase whenever they pull away. They often return only after receiving enough attention to feel secure again. Once reassured, the distance fades until the next moment of insecurity appears, when the same pattern quietly repeats itself. This trait reveals someone who relies on emotional uncertainty instead of honest communication. Rather than admitting they need reassurance, they create situations that force others to provide it. The relationship becomes driven by anxiety instead of trust. Healthy relationships allow people to ask for comfort without creating emotional confusion. Someone who repeatedly withdraws to force reassurance is not strengthening the bond. They are training the other person to associate love with chasing, uncertainty, and emotional exhaustion, making reassurance feel earned through fear instead of freely given through honest connection. Demanding honesty while hiding truths. Some people insist that honesty is the foundation of every relationship, yet quietly hide the very information they expect everyone else to reveal. They ask difficult questions with confidence while carefully avoiding answers to those same questions themselves. Demanding honesty while hiding truths is the habit of expecting complete openness from others while deliberately concealing important facts, intentions, or actions. They create the impression that transparency is a shared value, but the standard only seems to apply in one direction. At first, their commitment to honesty appears admirable. They encourage open communication, ask you to tell them everything, and claim they cannot tolerate secrets or deception. This makes it easy to believe they live by the same principles they expect from others. The emotional damage begins when you realize the openness is one-sided. You become increasingly vulnerable while they remain carefully protected. Every truth you reveal gives them a clearer understanding of you, while the parts of their life that truly matter stay hidden behind vague answers, changed subjects, or convenient omissions. They often defend themselves by saying they deserve privacy while insisting your privacy is suspicious. Their secrecy becomes reasonable, but your unanswered questions become signs of dishonesty or mistrust. This trait reveals someone who values information as a source of advantage rather than mutual understanding. They want access to your inner world without offering equal access to theirs, creating a relationship where knowledge and vulnerability remain unevenly distributed. Healthy relationships are built on balanced honesty, where both people are willing to be open with each other. Someone who constantly demands transparency while protecting their own secrets is not seeking trust. They are seeking an emotional advantage, making your honesty a requirement while treating their own hidden truths as something you should simply accept without question. Valuing goodness's appearance over practice. Some people work much harder to look like good people than to actually become good people. Their greatest concern is not whether they acted with integrity, but whether others continue believing they did. Valuing goodness's appearance over practice is the habit of prioritizing a positive image above consistent moral behavior. They carefully choose words that sound compassionate, support causes that earn admiration, and present themselves as principled, yet their private actions often fail to match the values they publicly promote. At first, they seem deeply ethical. They speak passionately about fairness, kindness, and honesty. They know exactly what people expect from someone with strong character, and they rarely miss an opportunity to display those qualities when others are watching. The emotional damage comes from trusting the image instead of the reality. You believe you are dealing with someone whose actions reflect their words, only to discover that their principles disappear whenever living by them becomes inconvenient or costly. They often become more concerned with defending their reputation than correcting their mistakes. If confronted, they focus on explaining why they should still be seen as a good person instead of honestly examining how their behavior affected others. Protecting the appearance of goodness quietly becomes more important than practicing it. This trait reveals someone who sees morality as a performance instead of a discipline. Their energy is invested in managing how they are perceived rather than consistently living according to the values they publicly praise. Real goodness does not depend on recognition. It is revealed through choices made when no applause, praise, or approval is expected. Someone who values appearing good more than practicing goodness is often protecting an image that looks admirable from a distance, but becomes increasingly fragile the closer you get to their everyday character. Confusing fear with respect. Some people believe they are respected because others stay quiet around them. They mistake silence for admiration, obedience for loyalty, and intimidation for genuine influence, never realizing that fear and respect are not the same thing. Confusing fear with respect is the habit of believing that making people afraid creates meaningful authority. Instead of earning trust through fairness, integrity, and consistency, they rely on anger, threats, harsh criticism, or emotional pressure to keep others from challenging them. At first, this approach may seem effective. People obey quickly, avoid arguments, and rarely question their decisions. To them, this looks like proof that they are respected. In reality, many people are simply protecting themselves from conflict or punishment. The emotional damage comes from creating relationships where honesty disappears. People stop sharing their true thoughts, hide mistakes, and avoid difficult conversations because they fear the consequences of speaking openly. The connection becomes built on caution rather than trust. They often become frustrated when others seem distant or emotionally guarded, failing to recognize that fear encourages compliance, not closeness. A person may stay physically present while emotionally withdrawing to protect themselves. This trait reveals someone who values control more than genuine influence. They believe authority comes from making others afraid instead of making others feel safe enough to respect them willingly. Their confidence depends on people being too intimidated to disagree. Real respect cannot be forced through fear. It grows when people know they can be honest, make mistakes, and still be treated with fairness and dignity. Someone who constantly confuses fear with respect may gain obedience for a while, but they quietly lose something far more valuable: genuine trust, loyalty, and the willingness of others to stand beside them by choice rather than by intimidation. Believing rules should not apply. Some people believe rules are important for everyone else, but somehow optional for themselves. They expect others to follow standards, respect boundaries, and accept consequences, while quietly convincing themselves that their own situation is different. Believing rules should not apply is the habit of seeing yourself as an exception to the expectations you place on others. Whether it involves honesty, loyalty, responsibility, or basic courtesy, they believe their reasons are always special enough to justify breaking the very standards they demand from everyone else. At first, these exceptions may seem reasonable. They explain why they had no choice, why their circumstances were unique, or why the situation was more complicated than it appeared. But over time, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Somehow, every broken promise, crossed boundary, or selfish decision comes with an explanation that places them outside the rules they expect others to obey. The emotional damage comes from living under constant double standards. You are expected to apologize for mistakes they excuse in themselves. Your actions are judged strictly, while theirs are softened by endless justifications. Fairness slowly disappears because accountability is applied unevenly. They often become deeply offended when someone else behaves the way they do. The very actions they defend in themselves suddenly become unacceptable when directed toward them, exposing a standard that changes depending on who benefits. This trait reveals someone who values privilege more than principle. They do not reject rules entirely. They simply believe they deserve freedom from them. Their sense of entitlement quietly replaces their sense of fairness. Healthy people understand that integrity means living by the same standards you expect from others. Someone who constantly believes the rules should not apply to them is often protecting their own comfort while expecting everyone else to carry the responsibility they refuse to accept.